host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Sunday, September 20th, 2020, and we are live. Let me make sure we are on. Okay. All right. So we're live. Hope everybody's doing well today. Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook pages, on your social media pages. Invite your friends to tune in also. Normally we broadcast on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF, but we're going to join them in progress. They're playing, they have the NBA championship going. All right, so we have a jam-packed show tonight or today, running a little late. It's been a crazy week, as you all already know, and if you've been following my Facebook posts, you know that. It's been a crazy week. Everybody share this broadcast on your social media pages. Invite your friends to tune in also. And we're broadcasting on my personal page, Michael Imhotep, and we'll get this set up so you can share it as well. All right. So Friday, I was watching MSNBC and Joanne Reed, and I was also watching Roland Martin on Roland Martin Unfiltered. In the news, the breaking news came that Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away from cancer. All right, so then that started a firestorm of who's going to fill her seat. Moscow Mitch McConnell saying that we're going to go ahead and fill this seat. It's less than 50 days until the November 3rd, 2020 election. We know people started voting this past Friday in states like North Carolina. Early voting has already started, and all hell has broken loose. Okay, people who were saying, well, I'm not sure if I'm going to vote. I'm not sure if I'm going to vote for things like this. People are realizing what is at stake in this 2020 election. And if you go back to 2016, I talked about how many people, especially African-Americans, don't understand the importance of the courts, the federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay. And over these next few weeks, we're about to get a real history class, well, real law class in the U.S. Constitution. We saw how that played a part back in January and February with the impeachment trial of Donald John Trump, okay, 2020. And we're about to see this even more, okay? So what we're going to talk about on today's show, we'll deal with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated legacy on race, because it is a complicated legacy, and she did, fight for civil rights, things like that. But she, I'll take her any day over whoever Trump's going to nominate. I'll take her any day over whoever Trump's going to nominate. Okay. And then also, we also have to understand the implications here, right? November 10th, 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court takes up the case to abolish the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare. All right. Now, I don't know how many people know this. Okay, Donald Trump ran on repealing and replacing the Affordable Health Care Act. He doesn't really have anything to replace it with. All right. We know back in, I think it was July of 2020, he said that he was going to be signing a new healthcare bill in 2 weeks. Okay, well, that has to pass the House of Representatives. That's not going to pass the House of Representatives. July came and went. August came and went. We're almost through September. No new healthcare bill. He was lying. He was lying. All right. So a lot of people don't understand the impact that the U.S. Supreme Court has or could have on healthcare. Number one. Number two, how many of you all remember the year 2000 presidential election? Right? Al Gore, George W. Bush, and it went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you realize that this 2020 election could become a contested election that ends up in the U.S. Supreme Court for the U.S. Supreme Court to decide? And Donald Trump could very well pick a Supreme Court justice who will be deciding whether or not he wins a second term, elections have consequences. This is serious. Elections have consequences. All right, so we'll break this down on the African History Network show. We'll deal with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated legacy on race. We'll also talk about the documentary. We'll continue our discussion dealing with the documentary Enslaved that airs on Epics. It started Monday, September 14th, 2020. It features Samuel L. Jackson, and it deals with uncovering the lost shipwrecks of the transatlantic slave trade and understanding the transatlantic slave trade based upon these lost shipwrecks. And Samuel L. Jackson goes back to Gabon in central West Africa, and he did a DNA test. He traced his ancestry back to the Benga people of Gabon. So I saw the first installment. It's going to air over the course of 5 weeks. It airs on Monday nights, okay, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then the re-airs 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So check that out on Epics, EPIX. We'll talk some about that. We talked about on last week's show. We'll continue our discussion on today's show. So when we look at coronavirus continues to kick everybody's behind. We're at 200,000 deaths. Now, Donald Trump is basically declaring victory on coronavirus, and he doesn't want to talk about coronavirus anymore. So he wants to talk about Supreme Court justices. Now, back in 2016, okay, and if you listen to me in 2016 when I was doing nationally syndicated radio, I talked about how many Republicans, not just Donald Trump supporters, but Republicans in general, said that the 2016 election was about the courts. They said the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal courts, both lifetime appointments. Many Democrats, many African Americans in general, whether you're independent, Republican, independent, no party affiliation, because I'm neither Democrat or Republican. I don't belong to any party, but I study policy, and I'm a historian, and I study law. So I know whose policies in general, especially at the national level, are doing us the most amount of harm. That's usually Republicans. Okay. So they said in 2016, this is about the courts. A lot of African Americans didn't understand that. A lot of Democrats didn't understand that. Now people understand that, and it's galvanizing Democrats. It's galvanizing people who are independents. It's galvanizing many African Americans to realize, this is really serious. It is. Elections have consequences. Okay. You had people who voted for Trump in 2016, not because they like Trump. A lot of them couldn't stand Trump, but they said they saw Trump as a means to an end, a means to fulfill an agenda. They said this is about the courts. Many of us don't understand strategy at that level because they're planning 25, 30, 40 years ahead. Newsweek.com just had an article this past week that talked about how Trump has gotten 216 federal judges confirmed. 216 federal judges confirmed in his 3.5 years. If he gets elected to another term, he could probably get another 200 federal judges confirmed, probably about another 200 or so, 150 to 200. Okay. This past week, they just ran through another 6. Moscow Mitch McConnell in the U.S. Senate. Most people don't even understand the importance of the U.S. Senate. This is serious. We have to understand law. So when I deal with principles of political self-defense, 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, this is what I'm talking about. If you haven't read the U.S. Constitution, you're probably completely lost. Because if you haven't read the U.S. Constitution, you won't understand all these moves being made. All is right in the Constitution. Go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, loc.gov, or go to archives.gov, which is National Archives, and read the U.S. Constitution. Okay. And then you can get this book. This book is probably about $2. It was $2 when I bought it years ago. I saw recently at a Second Baptist church here in Detroit on Monroe Street in their bookstore. It was still $2. The Declaration of Independence and Other Great Documents of American History, 1775 to 1865. All this deals with the foundation is the U.S. Constitution. But if we don't understand this, we don't understand the moves that are being made. Okay, so we'll get into this. And then we're going to join 9:10 a.m. Superstation. We'll join them in the second hour, from my understanding. But coronavirus, 200,000 deaths this past week. Donald Trump is declaring victory on coronavirus. Okay, he don't even want to talk about it. unless he's saying, oh, we how great it was, right? Over six is about 6.3 million people infected. National Public Radio, NPR.org, has a good article that deals with how the coronavirus pandemic is widening the racial wealth gap. How the coronavirus pandemic is widening the racial wealth gap. Now, a couple of weeks ago, the information came out and we posted about this, thehill.com and other sources. 500,000 children have been diagnosed with COVID-19. 500,000 children have been diagnosed with coronavirus. Okay. Now, even though that's only a fraction of the 6.6 million plus who have coronavirus, right? What we found out, and information just came out last month in August. Associated Press reported this, Huffington Post also. Black and Hispanic kids are much more likely to be hospitalized for COVID-19. Black and Hispanic kids much more likely to be hospitalized for COVID-19. Hispanic children were hospitalized at a rate of 8 times higher than white children, and Black children were hospitalized at a rate 5 times higher than white children. Okay, but now we're finding out Black and Hispanic students, Black and Hispanic children, are more likely to die from COVID-19. Now, even though it's a fraction of the deaths, 0.03% of the deaths, 0.03% of the deaths is a fraction of the deaths. It's somewhere around 121 based upon the study that they did. Okay, if your child is one of those children that died, you don't give a damn about the statistics and things like that. Okay, so let me put it to you like this: as somebody who had a child who was born prematurely and died, that's not something you want to go through. Let me put it to you like that. Okay. So we'll talk some about that. How the coronavirus pandemic is widening the racial wealth gap. Then we see the Congressional Black Caucus this past week. News1.com had a really good article. CBC introduces the Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically. The Congressional Black Caucus introduces the Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically. They had a really, News1.com had a really good article dealing with that. Now, I didn't see a lot about that in MSNBC. I didn't see a lot about that in mainstream media, NBC News, etc. But News1.com covered this. Okay, Roland Martin may have covered it on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I think I saw a lot of his shows this past week. Did not get to see everything. One thing that they did cover on MSNBC, and everybody's been talking about this: Donald Trump is attacking the 1619 Project. The New York Times 1619 Project. Donald Trump is attacking the 1619 Project on slavery, and he vows to restore, quote unquote, patriotic education. He vows to restore patriotic education. What the hell is that? Now, a few weeks ago, Trump was interviewed and he said he never heard of the year 1619. He's heard of 1492. It's like, wait a second, man. This is the type of dumbass that we have as a president. First of all, 1492, Christopher Columbus. Columbus never came to this land that we call the United States of America. Okay, just so we understand. You've heard me talk about this before. Christopher Columbus never came to this land we call the United States of America. 1619 happened in Virginia. So if this fool is saying he never heard of the year 1619, which actually happened in this land in Virginia, which became part of the United States, but he's heard of 1492, and Columbus went into the Bahamas October 12th, 1492. So Columbus set sail from Spain August 3rd, 1492. That was the day after the Sephardim, the Sephardic Jews, were kicked out of Spain. And it was later in the same year that the Moors in Granada, January 2nd, 1492, gave up power, relinquished Granada. Okay, that was the fulfillment of the Reconquista, the reconquest, which started in which to make this history lesson short, which started in 722 AD after the Moors invaded in 711 AD. okay, invaded Spain. And well, it wasn't Spain then, it was the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal. Then it was called the Iberian Peninsula. All right. You gotta, to understand the transatlantic slave trade, you have to understand the history of the Moors. All right. And because I got a lot of information to cover tonight, we can't get deep into this, but just very quickly here. Very quickly, you want to read these two books, Golden Age of the Moor, Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, and Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe by Runoko Rashidi, who's a friend of mine. And actually, Runoko has an essay in this book, right? Also, okay. If you read these two books, then you better understand the transatlantic slave trade, because you can't start studying the transatlantic slave trade like in 1441 with the Europeans going into Mauritania with the Portuguese. Okay, the Portuguese are going to dominate the transatlantic slave trade for the first 200 years, and it basically starts with the Portuguese. All right, we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade. You have to understand the hundreds of years of history before that of the Africans known as the Moors. Okay, going all throughout Europe. You can't start that history in 1619 or 1526 with the Spanish taking Africans into the territory we today call Georgia and South Carolina, 93 years before 1619. All right, so we have to understand this chronology of history. All right, so we'll talk some about Donald Trump attacking the 1619 Project, and then we'll continue our analysis of Joe Biden's plan to empower Black America. Okay, now you know it's broken in 6 parts. It came out May 4th, 2020. It's at his website, joebiden.com. It's a 22-page agenda that shows how his policies will benefit Black people, African Americans. You know, when it came out in early May 2020, I spent 6 weeks of this show breaking it down. That's all archived. You can go back and watch it. Now that he has accepted the Democratic nomination, I said we're going to go back through and analyze it all over again. Because I watch people on social media keep running their mouths. They have no clue it exists. I'm asking, where the hell do you get your information from? I can't figure this out. Everybody has a smartphone, but some people are dumber than ever. So we're going to go back through this again. So this is week 5. This is week number 5 of us breaking it down. Today we'll deal with environmental justice and how his policies on environmental justice impact African Americans. Okay. And you can read his full policy platform at joebiden.com. It's not an endorsement. You can read it at joebiden.com. And, you know, we went through, and back in my March 10th and March 17th show, we went and looked at all the policy platforms of the Democratic candidates and how they would impact African Americans. So you follow me on Facebook, The African History Network, The African History Network. You can go back and watch all those shows. Follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Okay, Michael Imhotep on YouTube. All that stuff is there. And our shows are in audio podcast format also go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com and click on listen to podcasts. And we're on, iTunes, Castbox, Acast, Stitcher, TuneIn, FM Player, wherever you get your podcast from. Search for the African History Network show. Okay. So while people are talking about Kamala Harris wearing Chuck Taylors and Timberlands, and they deal with all the superfluous nonsense, right? We're dealing with like the real issues and policies and understanding law and history. Okay. All right. So we'll deal with that. And then also Associated Press and Huffington Post had this article, other outlets picked it up. Black and Hispanic children more likely to die from COVID-19. So we'll deal with that and more on the African History Network show. Let me see, make sure I got all this, because it's so much that's going on that I originally, like early in the week, I said we were going to cover. But then, I only have so much time and only so much energy. So I said, we're going to do separate broadcasts about that. All right. Also, we have my friend Abdul Akil. There's so many people passed away 2020. Memorial services for my friend Abdul Akil. Brother Kwesi is taking place at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. A lot of people here in Detroit knew him in the African-centered community. Thanks to Sister Nubia Wardford for helping to organize this. She sent me the information. I'll be speaking there. She has me doing something. I do what Black women tell me to do. That's why I'm still alive. That's why I've been alive 49 years, right? So I'll be there. So it's taking place. So the memorial service for our dear brother Kwesi Abdul Akil will be held at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on the patio. It's located at 315 East Warren Avenue in Detroit, Michigan. So most people know where the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History is, right across the street from the CVS. Okay, 315, but don't park in their parking lot because they'll tow your car. 315 East Warren Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. For more information, you can call 313-494-5800. 313-494-5800. Saturday, September 26th from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Saturday, September 26, 2020, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Attendees must wear masks. Now, they ain't talking about African masks. They're talking about like cloth surgical masks, but don't come in there with a, Wakanda Forever mask, Black Panther mask. They're not talking about that type of mask. I know it's the Museum of African American History and an African mask there, but that's not the type of mask, because I know somebody gonna come in with that and say, well, hold on. They're not talking about that type of mask. Okay. Attendees must wear masks and social distance seating will be arranged. In lieu of flowers, please make a donation in Akil's name to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Okay. So she emailed me this information. I'll see if there's a flyer. We'll post this on our social media platforms, put this on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I'll be there because she has me reading statements and things like that. And we're going to get a statement from Professor James Small also. I talked to Professor Small this past Thursday. He was on his way to Atlanta. I talked to him Thursday. And I'm going to reach out to him again to bring him on to talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Supreme Court and what's taking place now, the impact that this has on African Americans. Okay. All right. So on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events in history and politics, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. We need to talk more about sex. All right. And much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. We got Stephen Boyle watching in Detroit. We have Erica Watson, Greg Osborne, Ryan Peters. Okay. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. It's Sunday, September 20th, 2020, the African History Network show. We're live in full effect. Okay. So follow me on my social media platforms, The African History Network on Facebook, Michael Imhotep on YouTube, also Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on Instagram as well. All right. So let's jump into this. Let's see. Let's go to. I'm gonna start out with. Let's see if we have this clip. And we should be picking up 9:10 a.m. the Superstation in a few minutes here for the simulcast. So. Let's go ahead and start with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I want to go to this clip here from MSNBC. Then I want to get to this article. It's a really good article from newsone.com, and this deals with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated history, complicated legacy on race. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated legacy on race. So oftentimes when you have somebody who passes away, and they are like an icon. She's the notorious RBG. All right. And I saw Peter Williams on MSNBC and NBC News, and he was right after she passed away, like minutes after it was announced, he came on and he was giving background information about her, and he said it's a play on a name of a famous rapper. He didn't say who the rapper was. Notorious B.I.G. Okay, Christopher Wallace. Okay, I guess he didn't know that, but he's like 67 years old. So, all right. I want to go. So oftentimes when somebody passes away, mainstream media may talk about them a certain way, but when it's filtered through the historical experiences of African Americans, it may be, their legacy may be more complicated. All right. So Sherilyn Ifill, president and director, counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, spoke with Rachel Maddow on Friday, September 19th, or September 18th, Friday, September 18th, about the pioneering legal work of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that she did before she became a Supreme Court justice, and what it meant to have a justice with a civil rights background on the court. Okay, so I want to go to this clip first, and then we'll jump into some background information and analysis on her. And some people talked about her speaking out against Colin Kaepernick's protest and taking the knee, things like that. She did do that. Now, she later retracted those statements. She did do that, but she ain't call him an SOB. She ain't call for him to be fired. She didn't attack him on Twitter. You know, I disagree with those initial statements, just like I disagree with Colin Kaepernick coming out after 2016 saying he didn't vote in the presidential election. That's a fundamental mistake, because the president nominates the attorney general. Attorney general sets the tone for law enforcement and policing in the country. Okay. And one of the things that Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, Donald Trump's first attorney general, did was to back off of the investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments, which under the Obama-Biden administration, they did an unprecedented amount of. But the ability to investigate police departments, the patterns and practice, okay, and lead to consent decrees, which they did with the Baltimore Police Department, Chicago Police Department, Ferguson, Missouri, things like that. That was part of the 94 crime bill that everybody talks about, but very few people actually really study. The ability for the Department of Justice to do that was given to the Department of Justice by Congress, the legislative branch of government, U.S. House of Representatives, U.S. Senate. That was part of the 94 crime bill. All right, let's go to this clip here. Let's turn
at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. Ifill, who is president and director, is Sherilyn Ifill, who is president and director counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. Sherilyn, I have been looking forward to talking to you all night. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
It strikes me that Justice Ginsburg is a different kind of justice than everybody else on the court, that it is not just where you are on the ideological number line and what part of the math you make up in terms of how, you know, various 5-4 majorities and minorities are put together on the court. She came to this position on the court after a lifetime's worth of work as a pioneering civil rights attorney. There's nobody else like that left on the court now.
No, and I think it's, first of all, just want to say how difficult it is tonight to kind of accept this passing, even though, you know, I think many of us believed and knew that it was coming. And that is a hole that's left on the court. You know, Justice Ginsburg herself had been a civil rights lawyer at the ACLU. She basically pioneered the field of women's rights law. She'd been a law professor, but she understood things that civil rights lawyers understand, which is how injustice actually unfolds. And we saw this when she dissented in the famous Lilly Ledbetter case, the case of the woman who didn't realize that she was being paid considerably less than a male counterpart in the same job. And a majority of the court couldn't understand how she didn't know. She was kind of cut off from her claim because it was brought too late, they said. and Justice Ginsburg's dissent, in which she talked about what the workplace is like, why a woman would not know that she was being paid less than her male counterpart, was so powerful and important, and later became the basis of the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act that was signed by President Obama. And same in that strip search case involving the 13-year-old girl that you may remember, the Safford Independent School case, where at oral argument, a number of the male justices seemed not to be able to understand why a 13-year-old girl would feel so humiliated by being strip searched in school as officials looked for drugs. And Justice Ginsburg, later talked about they were never 13-year-old girls. She had a way of bringing into the work not only her brilliant intellect and her knowledge of the case law, but she also understood the lives of ordinary people because she had had clients who had been in those situations.
Sherilyn, I feel like a lot of people right now are despairing, specifically about the prospect of civil rights and voting rights if Leader McConnell succeeds in what he says he's going to do tonight, which is getting a Trump nominee voted on in the United States Senate, despite the fact that we're only 46 days away from an election, and despite the fact that he held a seat open for 400 days when Antonin Scalia died and President Obama was there. I think a lot of people are despondent tonight about the prospect of another Kavanaugh or Gorsuch or Alito or Thomas type judge being put on the court and instituting what will be a generation of a hard right majority that knows that no voting rights or civil rights act or civil rights case will survive. How dire are your worries about that prospect?
Well, I haven't quite gotten there yet, Rachel, because I don't think we are there yet. I think this is a moment of reckoning for this country, and my eyes are darting away from the camera because I'm seeing all these people standing outside the United States Supreme Court. This year, 2020, has been so difficult, but it has really been a reckoning. We are being called to confront the deep flaws in our democracy and the flaws in our political leadership. And this is one of those moments when we are going to see what we need to see. We are going to see whether there are enough United States senators who have the decency and the courage to stand for what is right. Today, we saw long lines of people preparing to vote in Fairfax, Virginia. There is a presidential election happening right now. Early voting has started, and people are trying to pick the person who will lead the country. They're trying to pick United States senators and other down ballot races. The obscenity of trying to nominate and ram through a justice for the United States Supreme Court for a lifetime appointment at this moment is something that it's very, very serious indeed, and that I don't think we can recover from. I don't think this is just about civil rights cases. I think this would be a grave blow to our democracy. And so frankly, this is a moment in which I don't feel challenged. I feel that this democracy has been challenged, and we are expecting and looking to, and I hope that you all will be compelling United States senators to stand up and answer the appropriate questions. And finally, at the end, stand for decency. It is indecent to imagine running roughshod over the will of the people who are voting in this election. The election is only 47 days away. On average, it takes 163 days from vacancy to confirmation for a Supreme Court justice. This is about raw power. And at the end of the day, we finally have to ask ourselves the question that the great voting rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer asked: is this America? We are at that moment now where we have to confront ourselves. We've lost a lot of our iconic leaders this year. We lost John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian and Reverend Joseph Lowry, and now Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And those elders have left us, and now it's left for us to determine who we are going to be. And so, yes, I worry about what could happen, but I think we have a long way to go before we get there. And you've already talked about some of the senators like Graham and Grassley and others who have said that they would not proceed with a vote if it was during the final year of Trump's first term, especially if the primaries had already started. Here we are 47 days from the general election. At the end of the day, have we no decency left? I'll be looking to see, I think, the American people, the people you see outside that Supreme Court, the people singing Amazing Grace, the people standing on lines the first day of early voting in Virginia and preparing around the country to vote despite the pandemic. Those people are waiting to see who we are going to be. I'm going to continue to push and trust and fight, as we will at the Legal Defense Fund, for the right thing to happen. And if it doesn't happen, we will keep fighting even then.
Sherilyn Ifill, the president and director counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It is an honor to have you here tonight on this sad and pivotal night. Sherilyn,
all right,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
It's extraordinarily important that we understand that.
Okay, so that was Sherilyn Ifill, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and that was it's actually Friday, September 18th, MSNBC Rachel Maddow show. So check out that clip. We posted the link here. And Chuck Schumer and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did a press conference today, Saturday, September 20th. We're going to go to a clip of that in just a second. Let me clear up some misinformation. Now, somebody posted here on the thread of this broadcast here on my Facebook fan page, the African History Network. Okay. Now let me, if you don't know me, if you aren't familiar with this show, this is the last show you want to come on with some bullshit and don't know what the hell you're talking about. Okay. So somebody posted that Kamala Harris did not have a black agenda. That's a damn lie. If you actually see, the problem is a lot of Negroes are lazy and they want to talk BS and don't go do research. If you actually went to her website when she was running for president, she had a black agenda months before Joe Biden came out with his. Now, Joe Biden's was more detailed. Now, usually as a candidate's campaign progresses, they flesh out their policy agenda. She had one before Biden did. I actually talked about that here on this show months ago. I said, how is it that people are saying she doesn't have a black agenda when she does, but people are not talking about the fact that Biden doesn't have one? Because Biden's didn't come out to May 4th, 2020. I study this stuff on a daily basis. Okay. And I saw, and I've been to his website many times, I saw when they updated his website with the highlights of his black agenda before it was actually released. So I knew one was coming. I said, how the hell they talk about Kamala Harris not having a black agenda when she did have one, but they ain't talking about Biden not having one? She had hers months before Biden did. This is the wrong show to come on with that nonsense. I'm just letting y'all know. Okay. You watch this show, you're going to learn. All right. All right, let's continue. You know, like Trick Daddy said, you're going to learn. I got to teach you. It's not like that. But I'm just saying, look, this is too serious to recite this bullshit that you hear other places. Okay. It's too easy to find out the accurate information to not know. All right. So you probably got that from somebody else, didn't know what the hell they were talking about, didn't research. That's so I'm not even going to hold that against you. I'm not even going to say your name because I don't want to embarrass you like that. All right. But let's continue. Okay. So that was Sherilyn Ifill. Let's go to this clip here. Let's go to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, Democrat, New York, U.S. Senate, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, U.S. House of Representatives. Okay. Schumer and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk high stakes of Supreme Court vacancy. All this deals with law. You got a lot of people talk now the people in 2016. I talked about this before. People in 2016 that said we don't need to vote. We just need to do economic empowerment, invest in the stock market. I said, that's good. We need to do that. My degree is in business administration. I've taught entrepreneurship for 7 years, help people start businesses, get funding for businesses. I managed companies that had contracts with the city of Detroit, the county of Wayne, Michigan, and the state of Michigan. So I understand business and government. I said, that's good. We need to invest in the stock market and start businesses, but we also need to elect a president who's going to protect the economy that your Black-owned business operates within. Consequently, 41% of Black-owned businesses, because of COVID-19 pandemic, have gone out of business as of April 2020. Forbes.com had a good article. We've been talking about that for weeks. Forbes.com had an article dealing with this. As of April 2020, 41% of Black-owned businesses have been wiped out. It's probably closer to 50% of Black-owned businesses now. So politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Your Black-owned business don't operate independent of an economy, because usually the businesses are based upon the premise that people have money to spend with you so you can stay in business. Otherwise, you're going to have to get a job in the cubicle next to them or on the assembly line next to them. So we have to, when I teach about 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, this is what we're talking about. All this is interconnected, interrelated. It's not separate. It's not separate. The businesses don't operate independent of an economy. They don't operate independent of law. Laws and policies shape the economy that businesses operate within. And it's estimated that 50% of these jobs, you got 29.7 million people as of about August 29th, 29.7 million people unemployed. There's another 860,000 this past Thursday that filed for unemployment for the first time. It's estimated that 50% of these jobs are not coming back, gone for good. Now, what's on the other side of this pandemic? What's on the other side of this pandemic is going to be a record number of foreclosures and evictions. Okay. And guess who's going to be hit hardest? Because the home ownership rate for African Americans is about 44%, for 42, 44%. We about to really be hit hard. Okay. And the majority of this, the overwhelming majority of this could have been avoided. If you check out Bob Woodward's book, and he talked about Donald Trump getting a warning from his national security advisor, January 2020, it was late January 2020. He got the warning from his national security advisor. He didn't take heed to the warning. There were warnings all along. There were warnings going back to November, December 2020. When there were warnings in his presidential daily briefing. There were warnings in January from his national security advisor. Not Ratcliffe, that's his current, he's had so many national security advisors. Robert O'Brien, January 28th, 2020. Joanne Reed talked about this September 9th, 2020 on the Readout, MSNBC. Check out the clip. We played it last week on the show. Joy Reid on Trump downplaying coronavirus dangers. Your president lied to you. Joy Reid on Trump downplaying coronavirus dangers. Your president lied to you. Read this article from the Washington Post, okay? Woodward book, Trump says he knew coronavirus was deadly and worse than the flu while intentionally misleading Americans. His National Security Council advisor on January 28th, 2020, Robert O'Brien told Trump this will be the biggest national security threat you face in your presidency, and Trump ignored it. Over 200,000 people are dead because of it, okay? 20% of the people who die of COVID-19 are African Americans, about 40,000 African Americans dead because of this. Okay, elections have consequences. All right, so so we see February 7th. Where's the one from February 7th? February 7th, 2020, when Bob Woodward interviewed Trump, Trump said, it's a very tricky situation. It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. He knew February 7th, 2020, it was transmitted through the air. Trump knew this then, and he downplayed it. About February 28th, Donald Trump said coronavirus was a Democrat's new hoax. He lied, and people died. March 19th, 2020, and let me, we got to connect to 9:10 a.m. Superstation. So just a second, we have to join in progress because of the game they had playing. March 19th. Yes. Okay. March. You know what, JT, I'm going to send you a clip. If you could cue this up. This is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Chuck Schumer. I'm going to send this to you just a second here, okay? If you could play that too. I'll introduce it though. Okay. All right. I'll stand by. Okay. March 19th, 2020. And we're gonna start broadcast on 9:10 a.m. Superstation in just a minute here. So stand by. Also, if you want to advertise with the African History Network, email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Current promotion, buy 1 month, get 2 months free. And we have some new advertisers, so you'll hear about that as well. Okay. But we'll be on the air on 9:10 a.m. in just a minute here. So just give me a minute. I need to email this here. Okay. But March 19th, 2020, Donald Trump said, now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob. Just today and yesterday, some startling facts came out. It's not just older. Bob Woodward said, yeah, exactly. Trump said young people too, plenty of young people. This was March 19th. Donald Trump just recently was talking about how just a few weeks ago, he was talking about how children are virtually immune to COVID-19. He knew back in March 19th, young people could catch it and die from it. Even though they're much less likely to die from it, it's like he knew all along. All right, stand by. We'll go on live in just a minute. They're on commercial break here. Okay. So we'll go to that clip in just a minute. All right, we've got Alicia watching. We've got Stefan. Jackie. Jackie said he fired the real admiral in charge of pandemics. That was Timothy Zeimer. John Bolton, May 2018. We talked about that here numerous times on this show. John Bolton. Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, we are already in progress. We're now broadcasting on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio, right here in Detroit. You also listen to us on iHeartRadio. iHeartRadio, download the iTunes, download the 9:10 a.m. App. Download the iHeartRadio app. You can listen to 9:10 a.m. Superstation there. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show. It is Sunday, September 20th, 2020. We've already been broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, and we're now joining 9:10 a.m. Superstation in progress. All right, so we're talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her complicated legacy of race. I just shared a clip from MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, Sherilyn Ifill of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy and also her civil rights background as well. In a few minutes here, we're going to go to this article from newsone.com from Bruce C.T. Wright that dealt with examining Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated legacy on race. All hell has broken out. Donald Trump is trying to ram through another Supreme Court justice. We're less than 50 days away from the November 3rd, 2020 election. People have already started voting this past Friday in early voting in states like North Carolina. I will be doing early voting as well here in Michigan. I'll be doing early voting in person. I'm going in person. Oh no, you can do it through the mail if you want to. I'm going in person early. We ain't playing games with this. This fool got to go. Okay. You got over 200,000 people dead from COVID-19. We just talked about how Bob Woodward revealed in his book. Read the article from the Washington Post. Woodward book. Trump says he knew coronavirus was deadly and worse than the flu while intentionally misleading Americans. Okay. This dude got to go. Period. That ain't no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This fool got to go. If he's this crazy and this many people have died in his first term, what do you think going to happen if he gets a second term in office? I mean, this is the same dude who threatened to use the 1807 Insurrection Act. If he's this crazy in the first term, what do you think will happen if he gets elected to the second term? 216 federal judges confirmed in his first term with the help of Moscow Mitch McConnell out of Kentucky. And they just ran through another 6 federal judges this past week. Lifetime appointments. Okay. All right. So JT, you had this clip queued up that I just sent you. Okay. Let's go to this clip here. Now, this is from Sunday, September 20th, 2020. This is Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Schumer and Cortez talk high stakes of Supreme Court vacancy. Let's go to this clip.
Extraordinarily important that we understand the stakes of this vacancy. Our reproductive rights are on the line. Our labor rights are on the line. Our right to health care is on the line. Labor and union protections are on the line. Our climate is on the line. With an early appointment, all of our rights, the rights that so many people died for, voting rights, reproductive rights, healthcare rights, all of those rights are at risk with this appointment. And so we need to make sure that we mobilize on an unprecedented scale to ensure that this vacancy is reserved for the next president.
And we only need 2 more senators to say that they will abide by RBG's wish. 2 have already said it. We need 2 more. So Americans, if you care about all these rights, if you don't want big, powerful, wealthy special interests to turn the clock back 100 years even, please, our fervent plea, our fervent wish is that you call your senator and say, abide by the wishes of this saintly, brilliant, caring woman, and wait. Let's have an election. Let's see the results, and then let us choose somebody on the Supreme Court.
All right. So that was from Sunday, September 20th, 2020. That was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senate Minority Leader for the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, talking about what's at stake here. Now, if you listen to this show, in 2016, I talked about what was at stake, the federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court, okay? And Republicans, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican, but I study history, law, and politics. And Republicans do a much better job of talking about the importance of the Supreme Court and things like this in the federal courts. They do a much better job of talking about this than Democrats. Democrats are talking about it more now, even before Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. Even before that, they were talking about it more. In this election, 2016 election, they should have been talking about it more because it's that stake, because the Affordable Health Care Act was being challenged. And as I said before we came on the air on 9:10 a.m. Superstation, November 10th, 2020, 1 week after the 2020 presidential election, the Affordable Health Care Act is being challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court. So you don't want a situation where Trump nominates and gets confirmed a Supreme Court justice who would then decide on the fate of the Affordable Health Care Act, because they could decide to revoke it. And the other thing is, now this is what people have to understand. If they go ahead with the case November 10th, 2020, and if there's a 4-4 tie in the U.S. House, and if there's a 4-4 tie in the U.S. Supreme Court, then it goes back to what the lower court ruling was, which was a court out of Texas that ruled that the Affordable Health Care Act was unconstitutional. And that would kick 20 million plus people off of health care and repeal the pre-existing conditions, which is part of the Affordable Health Care Act. This is why many of us don't understand how important laws in the courts are. People just focus on the president. The executive branch is just 1/3 of the branches of government. You have the executive branch with the president, legislative branch, U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, and the judicial branch, which are the courts. So once again, this all goes back to understanding the U.S. Constitution. Go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, go to archives.gov, National Archives, read the U.S. Constitution. If you don't understand U.S. Constitution, all this other stuff you won't understand. And you go listen to the broadcast last week, I broke down how the Amistad slave ship case of 1841, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case, how that is part, how that they were set free because of Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which then led the U.S. Congress March 2nd, 1807 to outlaw the international transatlantic slave trade, which went into effect January 1st, 1808. Therefore, when that Amistad ship came into U.S. waters, it was illegal based upon federal law, which helps to lay a legal foundational argument for reparations. But since most of us don't understand history of law, we ain't even making legal arguments for reparations. There's a legal argument in the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1. And we're up here with all this other stuff. All right. All right, let's continue. Those listening on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation at the beginning of the show, I talked about the memorial service taking place for our brother Kawazi Abdul Akil, who unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago. He was I'd known him 30 years. I met him when I was at Wayne State University. I don't even remember how we met. But this brother invited me to the ASCAC conference when it was here in Detroit, 1994, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. So I known Kawazi 30 years. He was, older than me. He was an elder. But it's being held at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on the patio. The Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on the patio. We know the museum's located at 315 East Warren Avenue, Detroit, Michigan. For more information, call 313-494-5800. 313-494-5800. It's taking place Saturday, September 26th from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. I'll be there. Sister Nubia Wardford, shout out to that sister. You've heard her here on the African History Network show before. She's helping organize this. So I'll be there reading statements that people are sending in. She has me doing, she just told me, look, I need you to do this. I said, okay. So I do what Black women tell me to do. So that's why I'm still alive. 49 years, I'm still alive. Okay. So she's going to give me my assignments when I get there. Attendees must wear masks and social distance seating will be arranged. Now, I know this is the Museum of African American History, but when they say mask, they're not talking about African mask. Okay. I know somebody going to show up with an Igbo mask or a Dogon mask or something. Those are good, but that's not the type they talking about. Surgical mask, cloth mask, cover your nose and your mouth. Okay, both. Don't walk around with your mouth covered and not your nose. Both, okay? Attendees must wear masks, surgical masks, cloth masks, okay? And social distance seating will be arranged, okay? Don't come in with a Wakanda Forever Black Panther mask, all right? Those are cool, but this ain't the type of mask that we need. In lieu of flowers, please make a donation in Akil's name to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Once again, for more information, call 313-494-5800, 313-494-5800. Okay. All right. So let's jump into this article here from newsone.com. This deals with examining Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated legacy on race. Examining Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's complicated legacy on race. Okay. And once again, if you like this type of information, also you could donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button. All right. So a lot of times when you have an iconic figure who passes away, all the media is praising them and things like this, right? But when we look through their history through the prism of the African-American experience and through the prism of race and racism, et cetera, things like this, a lot of times it can be complicated. So the news of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death has rattled a nation for a number of different reasons, as the 87-year-old champion of women's rights passed away Friday, September 18th, following a years-long battle with metastatic pancreas cancer. Okay, metastatic pancreas cancer. Amid the outpouring of condolences, there were immediate partisan concerns over who would fill her coveted seat. on the highest court in the land and how that process might play out with less than 2 months before election day. And we know Lil Weasel, Moscow, Mitch McConnell said they were going to fill the seat after in 2016. They said that the president should not fill the seat when Justice Scalia passed away, and you had President Obama nominate Merrick Garland, and the Republicans did not even give Merrick Garland a hearing, anything like this. His nomination expired. They blocked it. Okay, just like Moscow, Mitch McConnell, Republicans blocked nominations of President Obama to the federal bench in the last 2 years. So when Trump became president through the Electoral College, and unfortunately many of us don't understand how Electoral College works. I'm going to do a whole separate presentation breaking down the history of the Electoral College and how it works. Okay, because the popular vote does matter. It's the popular vote per state that matters, not the national popular vote. It's the popular vote per state. This is how Donald Trump won Michigan. And he got the 16 Electoral College votes associated with Michigan and won Michigan by 10,704 votes. Okay, even so Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Trump got this. He won those by 78,000 popular votes, and that put him over the top. He got over 270 Electoral College votes, even though Hillary Clinton got 3 million more popular votes. People haven't explained to us how this all works. Okay, now the information's out there. You know, we just have to read it. All right, but I broke this down in 2016. I'm going to do another broadcast where we go through and deal with the history of the Electoral College and how it works. And the people who talk about the Electoral College needs to be repealed. Okay, if you want to do that, if you can get 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate to vote to repeal it, and then get 3/4 of the state legislatures to vote to remove it by 2/3 majority vote and 3/4 of the state legislatures, you can do that. But Republicans won 2 presidential elections in the last 20 years through the Electoral College. I don't think they're going to vote for it. It'd be easier for us to read how this stuff works and kick their behinds. I'm just saying, if you want to get something done. All right. So the justice who was also affectionately referred to as the notorious RBG, we talked about that, play on notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, okay, was remembered for being a reliably outspoken liberal voice on the bench and helping to shape the modern era of women's rights. But Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death also drew attention to Pauli Murray, the relatively unheralded Howard University trained Black and queer lawyer whose pioneering legal arguments in the 1960s comparing gender discrimination and racial discrimination were credited with inspiring RBG to do the same. It appeared to be one of the first instances documenting Ginsburg's relationship with Black America or African Americans, at least a Black American. But it would be far from her last, as she went on to an illustrious 27-year career as the United States Supreme Court Justice, a career that had its ups as well as its downs when it came to the topic of race. Okay, now she sometimes referred to as the Thurgood Marshall of gender equality. So the NAACP put out statements. Derek Johnson, the NAACP, we just heard those listening on my social media platforms, we just heard Sherilyn Ifill of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, who gave some background information on Ginsburg and some of the fights she led dealing with civil rights and women's rights, things like this. The NAACP mourned Ginsburg's death and defended her as a fearless champion of equality. Quote, when President Bill Clinton nominated her to the Supreme Court, end quote, NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson recalled in a press release on Friday. Derek Johnson said, quote, he called her the Thurgood Marshall of gender equality. Marshall was, of course, the first Black Supreme Court justice. Now, just people who are confused, Bill Clinton was not the first Black president. I'm just, if you still, he wasn't Black at all. And so I'm just saying, okay. Let's look at Black law clerks, okay. She only had 2 black law clerks. Now, this is not an attack. First of all, what I say may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Just because you never heard it before, disagree with it, or don't like it, does not mean it's not true. It just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. Okay. So I'm not attacking her. We're analyzing her legacy, putting it into a different perspective as it goes through the lens of the African-American experience. Because when you hear the conversations in quote unquote mainstream media, a lot of this doesn't come up. Okay. So she had 2 African-American law clerks in the total during her decades as a judge. Okay. That included 1 clerk during her 13 years on the DC Circuit Court, a duration where the National Review reminded its readers, quote, she had never had a single black law clerk, intern, or secretary. Out of 57 employees, 0 were African Americans. Now, that unfortunate trend continued after she became a Supreme Court justice, when she, quote, hired only 1 black clerk among the more than 100 clerks she has had, end quote. She hired only 1 black clerk as a Supreme Court justice. She hired only 1 black clerk among the more than 100 clerks she had, end quote. Okay. Now, I'm not saying there weren't cases that she ruled on that were beneficial to African Americans, things like that. I'm not saying people should hate her. We're dealing with history and a legacy and better understanding it. When we deal with the national anthem protest controversy, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg also raised quite a few eyebrows over her negative response to Colin Kaepernick's silent kneeling protest during the national anthem. Okay, and I remember when she made the statement. Now, this was early on in the protest. This was because I looked at those statements recently. It was August, September. She made those statements, I think it was in October 2016. His protest was noticed right about August 25th, 2016. It was the third week. It was a third week of preseason games in that season. He actually started with the first preseason game. He was sitting on the bench. It wasn't noticed to the third preseason game, which is about August 25th, 2016. San Francisco 49ers were playing against the Green Bay Packers. Okay. So it was about October 2016 that she made her statements, but then she later retracted those statements. She said, quote, I think it's really dumb of them, end quote, Ginsburg said in 2016 when asked for her thoughts on the protest before continuing later, quote, I think it's dumb and disrespectful. I think it's a terrible thing to do, but I would not lock a person up for doing it. I would not lock a person up for doing it. I would point out how ridiculous it seems to me to do such an act. Okay. Now, she didn't say he should be fired or anybody who takes a knee should be fired. She didn't say they should leave the country if they don't like the country. Okay. She didn't say that. Now, Kaepernick, whose kneeling protest has been all but officially adopted by the entire NFL and its players this current season, said at the time that he was dismayed at her response. Colin Kaepernick said, quote, it is disappointing to hear a Supreme Court justice call a protest against injustices and oppression stupid, dumb, in reference to players doing that, he said. Okay, I think we're out of time. We're out of time, JT? Okay, we're out of time here on 910 AM Superstation. They had a game on before me. So follow me on my social media platforms. We're going to continue this discussion on my social media platforms, The African History Network on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, and Michael Imhotep on YouTube, IMHOTEP. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. We'll talk to you next week. Peace. All right. So let's see. All right, we're still here on my social media platforms. Normally we do 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 910 a.m. the Superstation WFDF here in Detroit. I do radio here in Detroit. They had a game on before me, so on 910 it was short. We only did a half hour, but hey, we've been going already. We joined them in progress because we were already going on here. I control this, so hey. So we have some new advertisers. We'll take a quick commercial break here. If you want to advertise with the African History Network, email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We have one or two more slots available because we brought on some new advertisers this past week. The film Happy features a host of African-American scholars from different fields, whether it's psychology, history, or business. Are you ready for a new Black economy? Well, Happy is a brand new documentary that will set you on a new path of knowledge and enlightenment. The Happy film gives viewers a snapshot of our economic history from the dawn of civilization right up to today. Happy brings together the brightest and most prolific minds in the fields of psychology, history, business, and politics. Together, they deliver a message of cooperative economics, financial independence, and a pride that we can all be inspired by. It's on sale right now. It's streaming on all digital formats. It's also available on DVD. Visit happyfilm.com, H-A-P-I, happyfilm.com. It features two of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and Professor James Small, okay, are in this documentary as well. You'll see Jabari Osazi, Dr. Julian Malvo. You've heard some of them, me interview them here in the past few months. Use offer code HAPI, AHN for 10% off. HAPI, AHN, 10% off, okay? Let me play this clip here. This is the trailer for the documentary Enslaved that is airing on Epix right now, featuring Samuel L. Jackson. We'll be right back.
More than 12 million Africans were enslaved and trafficked. More than 2 million of our ancestors died at sea. The ocean holds stories that haven't been told.
This is ground zero for the whole transatlantic slave trade.
The story of the slave trade is world history.
It's not something unique to America. It was a worldwide phenomenon.
All right. So last week we talked about the documentary Enslaved, and it's a 5-part series. We'll talk some more about that later on in the show. I watched episode 1. It was fantastic. Samuel L. Jackson went back to Africa. He went to Gabon in Central West Africa, and he did his DNA ancestry, found out he's from the Benga nation, the Benga tribe, and he reconnected with those people. It was fantastic. Okay, so we'll talk some more about that. All right, so let's continue here. We're talking about the complicated legacy on race of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This is a good article from newsone.com from Bruce C.T. Wright. Okay, how's everybody doing? JC and Renee and Lionel and Alicia. Okay. Watching us on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. We have a lot of people watching us on our YouTube channel also. Shout out to the people watching us on our YouTube channel, W Canty. And it's reloading. Here we have Rod, highly favored, Black Ace, just a few of the people watching us on our YouTube channel. Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Okay, so Colin Kaepernick responded. He said it is disappointing to hear Supreme Court justice call a protest against injustices and oppression stupid, dumb in reference to players doing that. He went on to say, quote, I was reading an article and it refers to white critique of Black protests and how they tried to delegitimize it by calling it idiotic, dumb, stupid, things of that nature, so they can sidestep the real issue. Okay. As I was reading that, I saw more and more truth, how that has been approached by people in power and white people in power in particular, end quote. Now, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg later backed away from her comments about the anthem protests. quote, barely aware of the incident. She said, barely aware of the incident or its purpose. My comments were inappropriately dismissive and harsh, end quote, she said in the prepared statement. She went on to say, quote, I should have declined to respond. I should have declined to respond. Now, so she did later retract those statements, her uninformed statements about Colin Kaepernick's protest. Let me address quickly here what Kaepernick said, though. He said he was reading an article. He said, I was reading an article and it refers to white critique of black protests, and how they tried to delegitimize it by calling it idiotic, dumb, and stupid, things of that nature, so they can sidestep the real issue. Now, I've talked about that numerous times, how people want to shut up Kaepernick, want to silence the protests. It was a silent protest. They want to silence the silent protests, right? But they don't want to deal with the issue of why the NFL players were protesting, fighting against, not just fighting against racism, white supremacy, police brutality. They don't want to deal with the issues of why they were protesting. They want to make the issue about the flag. It wasn't about the flag. Okay? It's about protesting against white supremacy, racism, police brutality, things like this. A lot of people, even though it's more, the protests are more popular today in the NFL, you still have a lot of people who want to silence them and make it a cultural issue about loving the flag, patriotism, things like that. But taking a knee is a sign of respect from the military. Taking a knee is a sign of respect from the military. This wasn't about the military. This wasn't about the flag. This is about fighting against white supremacy and racism and police brutality. Okay? And a lot of people don't want to deal with those issues, because then it opens up Pandora's box. Then it ties it to the history of this country. It ties it to the battle over the Confederate monuments. There was an article, one story I was going to talk about tonight. We'll talk about it next week. It deals with how there's so many schools still left named after quote unquote Confederate heroes that our children go to. Okay. And white children also, but just children in general in the US, still named after traitors to the Union. All right. So next topic is dealing with Ginsburg. Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act. Now, this was the U.S. Supreme Court case Shelby County versus Holder, 2013, which still impacts us today. This led to there being 868 fewer polling places in 2016, 868 fewer places to vote in 2016 because of Shelby County versus Holder. Okay, so Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented vehemently as the conservative-led Supreme Court in 2013 struck down a key component of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is history in the headlines. This is history, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, Section 5 being gutted in 2013, then removing the oversight, the federal oversight, because if you look at, this is something we talked about last week, and I did a presentation in February 2020 where I broke this down, which dealt with, I'm gonna air that here on our network also, that presentation, because I have a lot of lectures I did last year and this year that I need to air on the network. This one deals with, this is from Smithsonian Institute. And this deals with, does an amendment give you the right to vote? Where's that article? Does an amendment give you the right to vote? Check that out from the Smithsonian Institute. This is another good one. When did African Americans actually get the right to vote? This is from history.com. When did African Americans actually get the right to vote? And they talk about Shelby County versus Holder. So 2020, this is the 150th anniversary of the adoption of the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment of 1870 guaranteed and protected the right to vote for African-American men. Okay. Now, nowhere in the U.S. Constitution, once again, this all goes back to the Constitution signed September 17, 1787. So this past week was the anniversary of the Constitution being signed. Nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give anyone the right to vote. It does not. The 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment guaranteed the right to vote for women, and the 26th Amendment of 1971 lowered the minimum voting age from 21 to 18. But nowhere in the U.S. Constitution does it explicitly give anyone the right to vote. Okay, so if we look at page 3 of this article from history.com, when did African Americans actually get the right to vote? Okay, it talks about 2012 presidential election. So when I teach about 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, we deal with history, law, chronology, and we deal with cause and effect. 2012 presidential election. President Barack Obama was on the ballot. There was voter suppression taking place then. A record number of African Americans turned out to vote. The percentage of African Americans that turned out to vote in that presidential election was 66.6%. That set a record. Scared the hell out of white people. Scared the hell out of Republicans specifically. Okay. In 2012, turnout of black voters exceeded that of white voters for the first time in history, as 66.6% of eligible black voters turned out to re-elect Barack Obama, the nation's first African-American president. That was 2012. A record number of African Americans voted. We didn't see the backlash coming. Okay. When you study history, whether it's the Compromise of 1877, whether it was the end of the Second Reconstruction with Richard Nixon being elected in 1968 as a backlash to the Black Power movement, as a backlash to the Civil Rights movement, as a backlash to the affirmative action, September 1965, as a backlash to the rebellions taking place all across the country. Like there were 159 violent uprisings in 1967 alone. They all weren't on the level of the rebellion that took place here in Detroit. But USA Today has an article dealing with the long, hot summer, and they're talking about the rebellion in Newark, New Jersey. There were 159 violent uprisings all across the country in 1967. Okay. A lot of them were small skirmishes, things like this. Some of them were big rebellions like Detroit. Okay. Nixon was a backlash to all that. Nixon ran on the platform of law and order, which means protect white people and lock up black people. Law and order, and often in the way they frame it, oftentimes protect white people from black people. Okay, this is the same thing Trump's trying to do. He ran on that in 2016. He's running on it now. Law and order. There's going to be law. Now he's the president of lawlessness and disorder, and he's trying to scare you about what happens if Biden becomes president. But all that stuff he's talking about is taking place right now under Trump's presidency. So in 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, ruling in a 5-4 decision in the case of Shelby County versus Holder. Shelby County is in Alabama. Alabama is ground zero for the fight for the Voting Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act. Shelby County is in Alabama. The holder that they were suing was Attorney General Eric Holder. See, people have to study this case. This deals with how laws and Supreme Court rulings impact history. So this was, 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, ruling in a 5-4 ruling in Shelby County versus Holder that it was unconstitutional to require states with a history of voter discrimination to seek federal approval before changing their election laws. This Supreme Court ruling weakened this 1965 Voting Rights Act. In 2013, they ruled that states that had a history of voter discrimination, like these former Confederate states, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, things like this, right? States with a history of voter discrimination, they ruled that they did not have to, it was unconstitutional for them to seek federal approval before changing their election laws. In the wake of the court's decision, a number of states passed new restrictions on voting, including limiting early voting and requiring voters to show photo ID. That's directly tied to Shelby County versus Holder. Right after this, when you go research this, 24 hours after this Supreme Court ruling came down, you had a lot of states passing new voter ID laws. Consequently, there were 868 fewer polling places in 2016. They were shutting down polling places. The majority of them were in communities that had a high African-American or Hispanic population. Ari Berman, B-E-R-M-A-N, who wrote for thenation.com, has had a series of articles dealing with the voter suppression that was taking place. And he has one dealing with how there were 868 fewer polling places in 2016. People need to study this because that Supreme Court decision still stands, because today there are approximately 1,700 fewer polling places. Okay? All this is taking place. All these moves are being made. A lot of us don't even understand these moves are being made. Don't even understand these pieces exist. So supporters argue such measures are designed to prevent voter fraud, while critics say these measures, like poll taxes and literacy tests before them, disproportionately affect the poor, elderly, African-American, and Hispanic voters, which they do. Okay, so if you don't understand history, you don't understand how to see that backlash coming, so we can defend ourselves against it and fight against it. Trump was a backlash to 2 terms of President Barack Obama. Many of us didn't see Trump coming. I said in 2016, I'm looking at this. I said, we got it. I said in 2016, numerous times, I was doing nationally syndicated radio 5 days a week. I said, we are going to need a record number. We're going to need a record turnout of African-Americans in the 2016 election because we have to stop Trump. Because I'm looking at the voter suppression taking place. I'm looking at lawsuits being filed against Republicans dealing with voter suppression. I'm looking at the Russian intervention. I'm looking at Jill Stein's ass won't drop out of the race with no chance of winning. And Jill Stein got 50,000 votes out of Michigan. The interstate cross-checking system, which knocked 1.1 million people off the voter rolls in 2016, it knocked 54,000 people off the voter rolls in Michigan. And Trump wins Michigan by 10,704 votes. So let's go back to the article from newsone.com dealing with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and examining her complicated legacy on race. Let's go to page 3 of that article dealing with the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act. Okay, how's everybody doing? Everybody share it. This is a different type of conversation. We don't do those simple Simon ass conversations here. Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Your friends will thank you. So RGB dissented vehemently as the conservative-led Supreme Court in 2013 struck down a key component of the Voting Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act. And we know the Voting Rights Act abolished restrictions on African Americans voting in federal, state, and local elections. She said, quote, "The sad irony of today's decision lies in its utter failure to grasp why the Voting Rights Act has proven effective." The sad irony of today's decision lies in its utter failure to grasp why the Voting Rights Act has proven effective. Ginsburg wrote in her response, her dissenting response. She said, quote, "The court appears to believe that the Voting Rights Act success in eliminating the specific devices extant in 1965 means that pre-clearance is no longer needed. In the court's view, the very success of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act demands its dormancy," end quote. So what the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act dealt with was The states that had a history, the states or districts or counties, territories, that had a history of putting obstacles in the way of African Americans voting, poll taxes, literacy tests, things like this. If they wanted to make any changes to polling locations, any changes to how many weeks you can do early voting, how many days you can do early voting, how many weekends you have souls to the polls voting, they want to make any changes, they had to get approval from a federal judge. Okay. And that was a lot of protection. When this decision came down, it said that these many of them former Confederate states, okay, that committed treason against the U.S. based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution and seceded from the Union, okay, seceded from the Union, starting with South Carolina, December 20th, 1860, which then leads to the Civil War being starting April 12th, 1861 in South Carolina. Okay. It said that they don't have to get federal approval from a federal judge to make these changes. All hell broke loose. This impacted the 2016 presidential election and is still in effect right now. So this is why we have to be smarter. We have to understand how to navigate this. So when I teach about principles of political self-defense, one of the things we have to understand is we have to understand the law better than they understand the law. If they're using the laws to trap us, if they're using the laws to oppress us, if they're using the laws to attack us, shouldn't we know the law better than they know the law? Shouldn't we know where all the booby traps are and the pitfalls are so we don't fall in it? And we have to understand how to disarm them of that law, disarm them of that weapon, and in some cases use it against them if need be. We're talking about political self-defense. So Justice Ginsburg later lamented in her dissent in Shelby County versus Holder, quote, "Hubris is a fit word for today's demolition of the Voting Rights Act." Okay, she wrote. Now, earlier that same year, 2013, during oral arguments in Shelby County versus Holder, the challenge to the Voting Rights Act at the Supreme Court, Ginsburg lectured Shelby County Attorney Bert W. Rein, R-E-I-N, about voter suppression and its effect on minorities. Okay. Quote, she said, "Mr. Rein, you keep emphasizing over and over again in your brief, and you said it a couple of times this morning, Congress was well aware that voter registration was no longer the problem. Congress was well aware that voter registration was no longer the problem," she said at the time. Quote, "This legislative record is replete with what they call second generation devices. Congress said up front, we know that the registration is fine. That is no longer the problem, but the discrimination continues in other forms," end quote. Now, when discussing the case during an interview with MSNBC in 2015, Justice Ginsburg said, quote, "We've come a long way from the days where there was state enforced segregation, but we still have a way to go," end quote. Van Newkirk, Newkirk, Van Newkirk of The Atlantic, theatlantic.com news publication. Van Newkirk of The Atlantic put it another way in 2018 when he said, quote, "Voting became rapidly more difficult after the Shelby County decision, particularly for poor and elderly Black people and Latinos," end quote, which it did. When we look at Ginsburg on birth control, in a 2014 interview, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg prioritized and defended Black women when discussing poor women's access to reproductive choice. She recalled a speech she was giving on the topic in the 1980s when she said a black man commented, quote, "We know what you lily white women are," this is a direct quote, "We know what you lily white women are all about. You want to kill Black babies," end quote. She said, quote, "That's how some in the African American community regarded the choice movement. So I think it would be helpful if civil rights groups homed in on the impact of the absence of choice on African American women. That would be useful," end quote, she told the New Republic. Now, when we talk about women's reproductive rights, that goes way beyond abortion. There's a whole host of issues dealing with women's reproductive rights. And most men have no clue about it because a lot of men don't even understand women's bodies, which is part of the problem, which is why, a lot of our women walk around angry. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But when you talk to women about women's reproductive rights, you learn a whole host of issues. It's just a lot of people, a lot of men may not know that women will use birth control pills to regulate their hormones and regulate their menstrual cycles. Okay. When you start talking to women about women's reproductive rights and women's issues, you get a real education. It's a whole lot of stuff, that you don't know. And part of the problem is that the majority, if issues of women's reproductive rights go before the U.S. Supreme Court, then the majority of the people ruling on this are men about women's reproductive rights. And a lot of men don't even understand these issues dealing with women. And this is not whether you for or against abortions or anything like that. This is a whole host of issues dealing with women's reproductive rights. And usually it's men ruling on it, which is problematic, especially when 51% of the U.S. population are women. So the article goes on to talk about how in the same interview in 2014, I think there's the interview with the New Republic. In the same interview, Ginsburg also had more glowing words for Thurgood Marshall, whose advocacy for Black people has been compared to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's work on behalf of women. Okay. Quote, "He was my model as a lawyer," end quote, she said before putting their legal existences into their proper perspectives. Quote, "The difference between Thurgood Marshall and me, most notably, is that my life was never in danger. My life was never in danger. His was. He would go to a southern town to defend people, some of them falsely accused, and he literally did not know whether he would be alive at the end of the day. I never faced that kind of problem," end quote. That's true. He got death threats. We talked about here on this show. When you look at the article from the Washington Post dealing with this nonviolent stuff that gets you killed. And I think it's in the article that Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr. wrote for the Washington Post. Okay. It's either that one or dealing with the long legacy of Blacks and the gun. But it talked about how Thurgood Marshall was in one of these southern towns defending an African-American. And it was Black men with guns who were protecting Thurgood Marshall because he was getting death threats. And if you read the book, let's see, we have it here. This book here by Professor Charles E. Cobb Jr., This Nonviolent Stuff That Gets You Killed, How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible. This deals with the part of the civil rights movement, the armed resistance, which is part of the civil rights movement and part of the African-American, and part of African-American history. If you go back and listen to the interview I did with Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, okay, who is an associate professor of history at Ohio State University, and he was on the advisory board that put together this study for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. It's about a 52-page study. You've heard me talk about it numerous times. This documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country. And it deals with numerous ways to more correctly teach the history of slavery. Now, this is, you can go to splcenter.org, splcenter.org, which is the Southern Poverty Law Center's website. And you can search for Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. It's free to download it. I took it to the printer, got it printed up. If you are homeschooling your children, if you are homeschooling your children by default, because you have to work from home because of COVID-19 and Donald Trump's dumbass, and your children at the dining room table trying to learn on Zoom, okay, this is something that you can use to teach, but the teachers in the schools should be using this also. All right, Teaching Hard History American Slavery. I pulled up one of these articles here from Washington Post. Let me see if I can, talk about Fred Shuttlesworth. This one here, Negroes and the Gun, Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement. This is an article from Professor Nicholas Johnson, who is also the author of the book Negroes and the Gun, the Black Tradition of Arms. This article is from January 31st, 2014. And in the article, let's see, they talk about, was it in this one? Because they lay all this out. Okay. Local lore in Columbia, Tennessee says that in 1946, armed Negroes were a break or a stop on plans to lynch Thurgood Marshall. The prodigiously armed T.R.M. Howard and the surrounding Black community were central in the quest for justice for Emmett Till. In 1956, Constance Baker Motley, who was a famous African-American female attorney, and Thurgood Marshall were guarded by armed Black men overnight and on the way to the courthouse when they were in Birmingham, Alabama to press desegregation cases. Okay, so there's all this history ties together. We go from Ginsburg to Thurgood Marshall to the civil rights movement to the armed resistance of African Americans in the civil rights movement. Okay, read this article from Washington Post. Negroes and the Gun, Nonviolent Winchesters and the Fine Art of Concealed Carry in the Modern Civil Rights Movement, January 31st, 2014. So we have to understand this history. And the people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past and the present and the future to meet the needs of the community. A people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. And what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Okay? So who is controlling the circumference of our own awareness? And what is it filled with? Is it filled with Cardi B and Offset and Sukihana and WAP? Garbage in, garbage out. Some of you all saw the CD cover I posted from Sukihana, hip hop artist Sukihana. It's called Wolf Punani. Go look at that on our Facebook page. That's what they're feeding us. Go back and watch the panel discussion I did with the sisters on Cardi B's WAP and Megan Thee Stallion and WAP, and we dealt with negative corporate controlled hip hop. We got to fight back against the entity that's attacking us, because the warfare has intensified with social media and all this. The warfare has intensified. Notice the puddle of water. What is similar to water? Notice the puddle on the CD cover also. Now, show me a white female artist with a CD cover, something like that, that has like the financial backing. I ain't talking about something independently put out. Has the financial backing of a major record company, major record label. They're not going to do it because they have more respect for our women. Now, when I posted that on my Facebook page a couple of days ago, I captioned it with the black woman is the most disrespected woman in America. Because they would not, these white corporations ain't gonna let no white woman do something like that. Because they respect them. So going back to the article dealing with Ginsburg and a complicated legacy of race. So in the same interview, she said she had more glowing words for, she also had more glowing words for Thurgood Marshall, whose advocacy for African Americans has been compared to Ginsburg's work on behalf of women. Okay. All right. She said she never faced the type of problems he did, getting the death threats, things like this. She said he would go to a southern town to defend people, some of them falsely accused, and he literally did not know whether he would be alive at the end of the day. Now, refusing to step down, okay, because she refused to step down when President Obama was in office. Even though there were calls for Ginsburg to retire while President Obama was in office so he could name her successor, she was adamant about remaining on the bench. She said, quote, "I will step down when I feel I can no longer do the job full steam," end quote, she said in 2015. All right, so check out this article. So when we have our own media, right, and events that take place in this country and people pass and their icons and things like that, we have to analyze this from our perspective also. Because a lot of times the mainstream media perspective is not necessarily our perspective. All right. But at the end of the day, I'll still take her over any of these jackasses Donald Trump's going to nominate. I'll take Ginsburg any day over these jackasses that Trump is going to nominate, because they're going to nominate somebody in their early 40s, mid 40s, ultra conservative. The American Bar Association may come out and talk about how unqualified they are, because these are names that came from a list from the Heritage Foundation. Okay, ultra conservative Heritage Foundation. This is we don't understand these moves being made, and because white people have a negative birth rate in 26 states out of 50. That's not me. That's the U.S. Census Bureau, June of 2018. June 2018, the U.S. Census Bureau put out a report that talked about how white people have a negative birth rate in 26 states out of 50. 2 years before that, it was 17 states out of 50. And they talk about how all this deals with the year 2043. 2043, white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. Now, some white people, that's not a problem to them. Others, it is. And they're trying to hold on to power for as long as they can. And they want control of the federal courts for the next 20, 30, 40 years. The federal courts and the U.S. Supreme Court. That's what this is all about. This is why Moscow Mitch McConnell has made it his number one purpose in life is to get confirmed as many conservative federal judges as possible. And under Trump, they've gotten 216 confirmed. So our children's children, so these are people, they're nominating people who are in their like late 30s, early 40s for the federal bench. They can be on the federal bench for the next 40 years, making rulings that impact our children's life. All right. For the sake of time, let's continue. All right, we've got Leah, Jackie, Erica. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. This is a different type of conversation. Okay. All that simple Simon ass celebrities be we don't want to do that. I mean, how many Oprah, Gayle, Jada Pinkett Smith, Snoop Dogg videos did I do? 0. Wow, we ain't have time for that. I've been studying coronavirus since January. Wait. All right. Okay, so let's go to the next topic here. And we have to take a commercial break here in just a minute. Samuel L. Jackson uncovers the lost shipwrecks of the transatlantic slave trade in the 5-part documentary Enslaved. I saw the first installment. It's airing on Mondays on the cable network Epix. It started September 14th, 2020. Here's the trailer of it. Let's play this again.
More than 12 million Africans were enslaved and trafficked. More than 2 million of our ancestors died at sea.
The ocean holds stories that haven't been told.
This is ground zero for the whole transatlantic slave trade.
The story of the slave trade is world history.
It's not something unique to America. It was a worldwide phenomenon.
All right. You can watch that on YouTube also. So I saw episode one. I mean, episode one was really good. He talked about how his cousin Gilda in Georgia had traced their ancestry back to slavery. Okay. And she's showing the family tree and the different ancestors on the family tree. He goes to her house in Georgia and she's showing him this. He does a DNA test, actor Samuel L. Jackson. He does a DNA test. He finds out his ancestry goes back to Gabon in Central Africa, Central West Africa, among the Benga nation or Benga tribe. He actually goes to Gabon and reconnects with the Benga people. They show all of this. Also, the documentary examines the transatlantic slave trade based upon lost shipwrecks, okay? We talked about the article on last week's show. We talked about the article from Forbes.com, and let me see. Where's that article? This dealt with the lost shipwrecks. And we'll post that link also from Forbes. Hold on, let me find that article here. I just saw it. Yeah. Uncovering the lost shipwrecks of the transatlantic slave trade. This is from September 11th, 2020. It's an interview with the people involved in this, executive producers, things like that. Okay. So this is a really good article. There was an excellent article from September 19th from the New York Times that I saw dealing with this also. Let's go to that one here. Okay. Samuel L. Let's see. It's loading up here. How's everybody doing on YouTube? We're broadcasting on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. You can also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. And let's see, before we jump into that, a lot of people want to learn about computers, and TechCore 2 can help you with that. So the revolution would not be televised. It would be digitized, coded, and branded. Don't let your young person get left behind. Join TechCore 2 on Saturday, September 26, 2020, in their 6th year, providing tech, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, coding Saturday classes. Okay. So instead of your children just at home Saturday, not knowing what to do, just sitting up watching television, they can learn coding. All right. TechCore 2 offers 9 different tech classes for students in grades kindergarten through high school, including computer programming or coding, gaming. Okay. Instead of just sitting up playing video games, they can learn how to code video games and get paid for it. Hip hop and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and video production. All classes are online with live instruction. All classes are online with live instruction. To register or for more information, please visit techcore2.org, 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 or give them a call at 215-879-6701, 879-6701. Don't forget to grab your $10 discount. Use the promo code THN Fall 2020. T is in Tom, or the THN Fall 2020. Use that promo code to get $10 off. All right. Okay. Let's go to this article here dealing with Enslaved. And if you saw Enslaved, post your comments here. We'll try to get some of those in. Okay. Somebody said low information voters. Okay. Yeah, there's some low information voters. This is low information. There's people with low information putting out YouTube videos also. I'm just saying. All right, so let's go to this article from New York Times. Samuel Jackson traces the history of the transatlantic slave trade, a docuseries on slavery through the lens of sunken slave ships that never reached their destination, ships that became mass graves of kidnapped Africans. This is from September 19, 2020. This article is written by John Eligon, Eligon, for the New York Times. So about 2 years ago, Samuel L. Jackson, the Hollywood titan, was presented with an idea to take part in a documentary about the transatlantic slave trade. Now, this is a different type of documentary. There's a few reenactments for a few seconds here and there, but he's going to Africa, reconnecting with the nation that he's from, the Benga nation, the Benga tribe. Okay. So this is different than a lot of other things we've seen dealing with slavery. Slavery, of course, was not a new topic of scholarship, and Hollywood had already done a lot on the subject, but Samuel L. Jackson discussed it with his wife, LaTanya Richardson Jackson, and something in particular stood out to them. This was a project attempting to tell the story of slavery in part through the lens of sunken slave ships that never reached their destination, ships that became mass graves of kidnapped Africans. It was a perspective they felt that could add to society's understanding of the horrors of slavery. Okay. Now, this is at the same time when Benedict Donald is attacking the 1619 Project from the New York Times. Okay. And we're going to deal with this other story. We'll deal with this next story, how Trump is talking. He vows to restore patriotic education in schools to counter the narrative that the nation is wicked and racist, because Trump don't even want to deal with the history of slavery. Elections have consequences. Samuel L. Jackson said that is a worthwhile story to tell, he said in the interview this past week. That story is now a 6-part docuseries. So in some places it says 6 parts, others says 5 parts. I guess a 6-part docuseries called Enslaved that premiered last Monday, September 14th on Epix, which will air a new episode each week over the next 5 weeks. Okay. So this is going to go up right close to the presidential election, which should really be interesting. Okay. Because you got Donald Trump, who said he never heard of the year 1619. He's only heard of the year 1492. And you have this documentary on educating people. And you've heard me say before, Americans in general are very ignorant of history. Americans in general, African Americans, white people, Americans in general are very ignorant of history, especially when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. So it's going to air in 6 parts. The documentary is also slated to begin in the United Kingdom on BBC 2, the BBC channel 2 next month, BBC 2 next month. The series traces Samuel L. Jackson's journey across the globe as he uncovers elements of the history of the transatlantic slave trade. He is joined on parts of the journey by Afua Hirsch, Hirsch, a British journalist, and Simca Jacobovici, Jokobovici, a documentary filmmaker and journalist who directs the series. And so the story also follows Diving with a Purpose, an offshoot of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers, as they search for wreckage of slave ships along the ocean bottom. Now, this also pokes holes in that idiotic theory that there were no slave ships. Another dumbass theory. This is just false. Okay. I guess the Amistad didn't exist, right? I guess Joseph St. Q and those Africans just swam here. So the series opens with Samuel L. Jackson traveling to Gabon in Central Africa, where he meets people of the Benga tribe, B-E-N-G-A, which he traces ancestry to through a DNA test. So the writer of this article said, I spoke with Mr. Jackson and his wife, an executive producer of the series, about their journey and also why this story feels urgent and relevant in this critical moment. The interview has been lightly edited for clarity. So I'm just going to go briefly through this. We'll post this link. You can read it in its entirety and do some more research on this documentary. So they were asked the question, why did you want to tell the story of the transatlantic slave trade? Samuel L. Jackson's wife, Miss Richardson Jackson, said, I think that most African Americans, if we could do it, we would at least try to trace the ancestry of our immigration here. This is something that sort of lives in our spirit. Samuel L. Jackson said, we felt it was a very different story. And it is. I've just seen the first installment, but it's a very different story. We've heard stories of ships coming over, where they were going, but we never talked about the ships that did not make it and what the consequences of that was, or even what the profitability of that was for the people that sponsored the ships. Even though people did not make it and they did not get to use their bodies for servitude, they still profit. Okay, even though people did not make it and they did not get to use their bodies for servitude, they still profit. He's talking about the people who own the ships, the slave owners, et cetera, did not get to use the bodies of Africans for servitude, but they many times had insurance policies on the ships and the Africans on the ships. So they cashed in on those insurance policies. So next question, what do you think that adds to the narrative that we know about the transatlantic slave trade and enslavement? Samuel L. Jackson said, the business of our bodies carried on. The business of our bodies carried on. We were viewed as cargo at that particular point before we got here and not human beings. We were less than human, same as tossing over some boxes or some horses or anything else that was on board. They were now there's in the first installment, there's a brief part, just a few seconds, where they talked about how the bringing Africans into this country was outlawed, but people kept doing it. So they're talking about when that law passed by Congress went into effect January 1st, 1808, because you had white men who were still bringing Africans into this country. So from January 1st, 1808 up until June of 1860, all of those slave ships that came into this country, that was illegal. The June of 1860, that's the Clotilda in Alabama. All that was illegal. So these are people violating federal law, and there are documented court cases of white men who were caught doing this, and they were prosecuted. In some cases, going to prison or serving light sentences or something like that, but it was illegal based upon federal law. There was an article that Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury wrote for Black Agenda Report back in 2017. And I interviewed them. I did a two-part interview with them. I interviewed them for a total of 4 hours. And that's archived in audio podcast format. Go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, click on listen to podcast, and go back to 2017. We dealt with this. And the name of the article is Reparations is Dead. And let me pull this up here. It's called Reparations is Dead. Authors seek to spark public discussion of new legal strategy. They're not talking about making moral arguments. We know slavery was morally wrong, but when you go to lawmakers like the June 19th, 2019 congressional hearing on HR 40, when you go to lawmakers, you don't go arguing morality. You go arguing law. So at the foundation of the argument should be Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. Because Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution tells you that the U.S. Constitution, all of the previous treaties and all the subsequent treaties, like the Black Freedmen Indian Treaties, 1866, it tells you all that's supreme law of the land. So an argument for reparations should be rooted in the U.S. Constitution, because that's the supreme law of the land. And then if the Affordable Health Care Act is in court right now, and Republicans are trying to repeal the Affordable Health Care Act and kick 20 million plus people off of the ACA, and it has saved millions of white people's lives. If they're trying to repeal that, you think if reparations somehow passes both chambers of the legislative branch of government and is signed into law by the next president, because this jackass ain't signed, Trump is against reparations. If you read Biden's Black Agenda, it's 22-page Black Agenda, read at joebiden.com. Biden supports HR 40. Trump don't support HR 40. Moscow Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, has already said reparations is dead on arrival in the U.S. Senate. Nobody can explain to me how you can get this passed, in the U.S. Senate when it won't even come to the Senate floor for a debate or a vote. It won't even get a vote in the Senate. It's not going to come to the Senate floor for a debate. Why? Because McConnell's the Senate Majority Leader. He controls the Senate. No bill can come to the Senate floor for a debate or a vote without his permission. Then you have a rule in the Senate called unanimous consent. So you couldn't even get a Juneteenth bill passed in the U.S. Senate. It was blocked in the Senate. If you can't get a Juneteenth bill passed in the Senate, how the hell are you going to get reparations passed in the Senate? No one wants to have this conversation to explain the strategy to get this passed in the Senate. People just say reparations now. Now, from who? This ain't passing the Senate. There's only 3 black people in the entire U.S. Senate out of 100 senators, and one black one already said he ain't voting for it. That's Black Tea Party Republican Tim Scott of South Carolina. You're going to need 60 votes in the Senate to get a reparations bill passed. Which, even if Democrats take back control of the Senate, which they should, because you can't get a lot of these other bills passed in the Senate unless they take back control. If it flips 53-47 Democrats, you're still going to need 7 Republicans. If the black Republicans are not going to vote for reparations, what makes you think white Republicans are going to vote for it? These are conversations nobody wants to have. I can't figure out why. Unless we just playing games. If we're not going to talk about how do we get the bill, a reparations bill, actually passed through Congress. It don't just have to pass the House of Representatives. It can't even get our committee in the House of Representatives, first of all. I'm just talking about HR 40. HR 40 is a House resolution. They ain't really a House bill. Because if it was a House bill, it'd be HB 40. HB is House bill. That means it's going to be signed into law. That means it has to pass the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate and be signed into law by a president. This is HR 40. This is a House resolution. This only deals with the House of Representatives. It can't even get out of committee. And then once they do their study, which they should, because a lot of those people in the House of Representatives are ignorant as hell of history. If you saw the HR 40 hearing, June 19th, 2019, you can go to C-SPAN and watch it. Those are some of the dumbest ass Republicans. Oh my God, Louis Gohmert of Texas. These are some of the dumbest ass. Jim Jordan of Ohio. These are people that vote on this. It's even worse in the Senate. So if we're not going to talk about how do we actually get a bill. See, this is why you need a congressional study. People say, you don't need a study, you've already done. No, you need a congressional study. Why? Because Congress has to vote on it. And Congress does studies. You need a congressional study. You need to have the experts, because they're going to come and present this to Congress. You need a congressional study. Congressional study has more weight with Congress than some other study. Even though you got some dumbasses in Congress, and there's 435 people in the House of Representatives. These are conversations people don't want to have. These are unsexy conversations. But we keep it real here. We don't, proper documentation ends all conversation. If we're not going to deal with how we actually get the bills passed through the steps, through the House of Representatives, through the U.S. Senate, and get signed into law by a president, then what the hell are we doing? All right. So let's continue here. So Samuel L. Jackson. So the next question was, how does this coming out now fit into the larger discussion we're having about racial justice? How does this, about the documentary Enslaved coming out right now, how does this fit into the larger discussion we're having with racial justice? Because you got some people that don't want to deal with the history of slavery. The next story we're going to deal with, Donald Trump attacking the 1619 Project. Now, 1619 Project is flawed. We'll talk about that. But they don't want to deal. You got a lot of Republicans don't want to deal with the history of slavery. Okay, they just want to. I guess they just want to deal with happy slaves, singing and dancing, singing zippity doo-dah, singing Dixie. How does this coming out now fit into the larger discussion of we're having dealing with racial justice? So Miss Richardson Jackson, Samuel L. Jackson's wife, said, especially with what's going on, it raises the question and it allows us to actually see, quote, look, this happened and we should be discussing that it happened, end quote. This is an American story. It happened and it can't be swept under the rug. That's true. So they were asked the question, Sam, I know you got to get acquainted with the Benga people in Gabon. What was that experience like for you? Samuel L. Jackson said, first of all, to find out that I was part of a tribe that was still in existence was a revelation. And then to get there and to actually go into the part of the country where they live, they're actually a beach tribe, B-E-A-C-H, a beach tribe. So they actually, he goes there, they're doing a ceremony, they're talking about their history in their native language. And he said, this is how they pass down their history to their children. They talk about when they arrived in that area. I mean, it was something phenomenal to see. Samuel L. Jackson's wife, Mrs. Richardson Jackson, said, which I think has a lot to do with in your DNA, your love of the sea, S-E-A. She said, which I think has a lot to do with in your DNA, your love of the sea. Samuel L. Jackson said it was a very moving kind of thing to do, to be in a group of people that welcomed me in a way that made me feel like I was coming home to a particular place. That's familiar to look around at the faces and see a familial look, referencing family, a familial look, like my uncles, my cousins, to have people that I'm connected to in a way that's genetic, that helps me understand things about who I am or how I make specific kinds of decisions, or what it means in terms of my longevity, my health, the things that I'm attracted to. His wife, Mrs. Richardson Jackson, said it's validation, total validation of a place and a time of origin. So we understand that African history and culture gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. It gives us our foundation. It gives us a cultural paradigm to see reality through. And it influences our economic empowerment and our political empowerment. All right. So, a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past and the present and the future and meet the needs of the community. This is why this documentary is so powerful. And this is why him reconnecting to his African ancestry and reconnecting to the Benga tribe is so powerful. It gives them a foundation, gives them validation. All right. So we'll post a link here. You can read the rest of this interview. This is from the New York Times. This is an article here. Very good interview. It came out September 19th, 2020. Samuel Jackson traces the history of the transatlantic slave trade. This is written by John Eligon, Eligon, for the New York Times. Also, the article here from Black Agenda Report, Reparations is Dead. Authors seek to spark discussion of new legal strategy, not moral strategy. You don't go to lawmakers arguing morality. We know slavery was wrong, it was unjust, and things like that. That ain't the argument. You go to lawmakers to argue law. Lawmakers don't legislate morality, they legislate law. So when you go to lawmakers, you argue law. So we'll post the link to this article here as well. All right. So African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast, and email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. And we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Our current promotion, we have like maybe 2 more slots left because I brought on a few new advertisers this past week, and I've been producing the commercials. You've seen some of the video commercials we have here on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. The African History Network, and we'll be uploading them to our YouTube channel also. The one for Hapi, the documentary Hapi, is already on our YouTube channel. I'm the one that does that. I do the voiceovers and put together the commercials, things like that. Okay. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Let's go to this next story here, dealing with Benedict Donald attacking the 1619 Project. Okay. So AtlantaBlackStar.com and other New York Times, Washington Post, I posted on this the day that it happened. Thursday, September 17th, Benedict Donald announced that he would establish a new commission purposed with restoring pro-American education to schools across the nation. This sounds like dictator stuff. This sounds like some authoritarian stuff right here. This reminds me of Nazi Germany, when in the schools they had curriculums that were teaching basically the children that hate the Jews, to condition them to accept the extermination of the Jews and the attack on Afro-Germans, because Hitler killed 50,000 Afro-Germans also. Okay, during the Holocaust, he killed 50,000 Afro-Germans as well. Speaking from the National Archives Museum in Washington, D.C., during the first ever White House conference on American history. Now, Trump doesn't understand American history, and he doesn't study American history. But the White House had a conference. They had a White House conference on American history. They had like 12 historians there, none of them African-American. They basically all white. Trump said that he would sign an executive order to create the 1776 Commission, which will work to counter the idea that, quote, America is a wicked and racist nation, end quote, by promoting patriotic education, which will work to counter the idea that, quote, America is a wicked and racist nation, end quote, by promoting patriotic education. If you don't want, Donald Trump, if you don't want people to think that America is a racist and wicked nation, maybe you should resign. Quote, we must clear away the twisted web of lies in our schools and classrooms and teach our children the magnificent truth about our country, end quote. This is what he said. Elections have consequences. Quote, the left has warped, distorted, and defiled the American story with the deceptions, falsehoods, and lies. There is no better example than the New York Times totally discredited 1619 Project. It has not been totally discredited. There's some flaws in it. Just like there are flaws in the history that's being taught in the schools right now. That's what this study from the Southern Poverty Law Center breaks down. Okay? That's what this study breaks down. And what they do is they did a survey of about 1,000 12th graders. 1,000 12th graders, and they break down how little they know about the history of slavery. Okay, if we look at this here, it was an online survey of 1,000 12th graders. High school seniors, page 9 of this study. High school seniors struggle on even the most basic questions about American enslavement of Africans. Only 8% of high school seniors surveyed can identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. Donald Trump probably can't do that either. Only 8% of high school seniors surveyed can identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. 2/3 or 68% of high school seniors surveyed did not know that it took a constitutional amendment to formally end slavery. That was the 13th Amendment. It wasn't the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. That's not what ended slavery. If you actually read it, you can go to Library of Congress, loc.gov. There were all these exceptions. And the border states like Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, they were allowed to keep their slaves. And territories that came back into the Union that had seceded from the Union, they were allowed to keep their slaves until, they abolished it or until the Civil War ends. Fewer than 1 in 4 students, or 22%, can correctly identify how provisions in the U.S. Constitution gave advantages to slaveholders, like the 3/5 Compromise of 1787, that gave advantages in the U.S. House of Representatives, because it says the 3/5 contrary to popular belief, 3/5 Compromise did not say slaves were 3/5 of a human being. That's a total misunderstanding. All right. And I love Malcolm. You see Malcolm, picture of Malcolm behind me. But in 1963, when Malcolm was interviewed at the University of California, Berkeley, and he said the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. That's not what it says. Okay. If we look at it, it's dealing with for the purpose of taxation and representation. And if we look at it here, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned. Representatives, they're dealing with representation in the U.S. House of Representatives. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within the Union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole numbers of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons with a capital P. What it's saying is at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787, the framers of the Constitution are debating, how do you count the population of enslaved people? Southern states want the full population count. Northern states are saying, well, wait a second, if you count the full population, you'll have total dominance in the U.S. House of Representatives, and you can just pass through whatever laws you want. They're going back and forth, determining, okay, do we count 50% of the population? Do we count 60% of the population? Do we count 75% of the population? Because when we look at representation in the U.S. House of Representatives, it's based upon population in the state. States that have more population, like California, has 66 representatives in the U.S., where they have 64 representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it has 66 electoral college votes. Representation in the House of Representatives ties into how many electoral college votes the states have. You take the number of representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives, you add to that the number of U.S. senators a state has. Every state has 2 based upon the U.S. Constitution. That tells you how many electoral college votes a state has. Texas has 38. Michigan has 16. California has 66. Maine and Vermont have 3. Okay, all this is based upon the Constitution. Electoral college ties into the presidential election. You have to get 270 electoral college votes to become president-elect by winning the popular votes associated with a state. If you win the popular votes in the state, like Michigan, you get the electoral college votes associated with the state. So they're debating. So they decide, okay, we'll count 3/5 of the population. It's not saying that 3/5 of a human being. We're counting 3/5 of the population of enslaved Africans per state to determine how many seats in the House of Representatives. So you take the number of free people in those states, and you add to that the 3/5 of the enslaved population. So this North is arguing because in a lot of the northern states, there were more free people in the northern states. They had a larger population, but in the southern states, when you added in the enslaved population, they had a larger population. So they compromise on counting 3/5 of the population of enslaved Africans, okay, for the purpose of representation in the House of Representatives and taxation, okay? That's what that's dealing with. One of the best articles dealing with this is from Dr. Paul Finkelman. I interviewed Dr. Paul Finkelman here on the African History Network show, and we broke this down. But he has an article for the Root.com dealing with the 3/5 compromise, why its taint persists. The 3/5 compromise, why its taint persists. He wrote it for the Root.com. It's a deep, deep article that really goes into this history. He's a history professor. He's written 50 books dealing with history. He was speaking at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. So I interviewed him also. We went through and broke this down. Because I've talked to African American attorneys who said, Constitution said we 3/5 of a human being. No, it doesn't. And at the same time, the full population of free African Americans was counted. At the very same time, the full population of free African Americans was counted. So this is, once again, an example of how many of us don't understand history, and it has monumental consequences. All right. So you got Benedict Donald, little bunker boy, traitor in chief, Manchurian candidate. He's attacking the 1619 Project. Now, the New York Times unveiled the 1619 Project in August 1619, which is commemorating the date on which the first Africans were brought to the shores of Virginia as, they say, slaves. Now, just keep in mind, when we understand history, and I've done broadcasts dealing with this, in 1619, codified slave laws did not exist in any of the 13 British colonies. Different colonies have codified slave laws coming to them at different times. The whole way we think this history evolved in general is not how it evolved. Because these first Africans, they came in on the White Line slave ship. And they were exchanged for food and supplies and water. Okay? Codified slave laws didn't exist. They were freed after 3 to 5 years, after they were put into a form of indentured servitude. All right. So 1619 is important, but the 1619, there are some flaws with it. Now, my friend, historian, Dr. Darrell Scott, who's a history professor at Howard University, I talked to him, and he pointed out some historical flaws. There's some things that I saw because they don't deal with the history of African people in this country going back tens of thousands of years ago, which is problematic. If you're saying we first came here in 1619, that's a damn lie. If you're saying we first came here in 1526, when the Spanish brought Africans into the territory that's today South Carolina and Georgia. That did happen, but that ain't when we first came here either. So people have to study this type of information. The first Americans were Africans, documented evidence from my friend, Dr. David Imhotep. His new book should be out either this month or next month. The first Americans were Africans revisited, because this was our land stolen from us. African people, we've been here going back at least 51,700 years ago. The Khoisan they were in South Carolina, the territory today called South Carolina. The Khoisan coming from Southern Africa, the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa, go all around the world. We've been here for tens of thousands of years. We were here in this land before Native Americans came into existence. Now, that does not mean the transatlantic slave trade did not happen. African people migrate and go into different areas at different times for different reasons. Yes, the transatlantic slave trade happened, but we were here tens of thousands of years before that. So the 1619 Project doesn't deal with that. But Dr. Darrell Scott, he did a Facebook post a couple of days ago. And in the post, he was talking about the 1619 Project. And he laid out 5 criticisms of it. One, racism did not begin in 1619, which is true. Racism didn't begin in 1619. Because these are things that the 1619 Project argues. Now, there's some good information in it, but some of it is flawed. I'll be the first one to tell you it is flawed. 2, slavery was not the primary cause of the American Revolution. Okay, they're separating from they're revolting against Great Britain because they don't want a monarchy. They want more control over their lives. They want freedoms, things like this. Slavery wasn't the primary cause of the American Revolution. All right. 3, African-American history is not the story of racism and victimhood. Our actual history is ignored. All right. 4, mass incarceration did not arise from the 13th Amendment. That was one of the problems with Ava DuVernay's documentary 13. The 13th Amendment is based upon the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Research the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. When the 13th Amendment is adopted and ratified December of 1865. When it talks about involuntary servitude is prohibited unless duly convicted of a crime. That law already applied to white men. You're giving African Americans the same rights that white people have. That law already applied to white men. Then they come in 1866 with the Civil Rights Act of 1866, things like that. You're giving the same rights that white people have, you're giving those to African Americans. If you study mass incarceration doesn't start until the early 1970s. So when I was doing, because I've done lectures with the origins of the prison industrial complex and going back to the federal prison industries in 1934, which become Unicor in 1978, and dealing with the origins of the privatized prisons and dealing with things like the convict leasing system, et cetera. And convict leasing system starts in about the 1840s during slavery. There were white people who were on the convict leasing system. Convict leasing system didn't start when slavery ends. It became more popular, but it was short-lived when you study it. And the last state to abolish the convict leasing system was Alabama in 1928. So 1865, 13th Amendment, mass incarceration basically starts in we see it going back to the early 1970s, basically starts 1971 with Richard Nixon's war on drugs that he declared June 17th, 1971. Why people think mass incarceration start with the 94 crime bill is some more screwed up history, because the U.S. prison population quadruples from 1970 to 1993. It goes from about 300,000 in 1970 to 1.3 million in 93. Go to bjs.gov, Bureau of Justice Statistics, bjs.gov, and look at the U.S. prison populations, and they give you the numbers each year. That's some more bad history. So, because I've done lectures dealing with the history of the war on drugs and things like that. And when I was doing the research and doing a chronology of all this and looking at the U.S. prison population, doing a chronology, Because I heard people say, oh, the 13th Amendment and mass incarceration, all this stuff. That's not why. Why did it take 105 years to have mass incarceration? If the 13th Amendment was passed to re-enslave African Americans, why did it take 105 years for mass incarceration to happen? Dr. Darrell Scott explained to me, we went to, when he spoke here at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History afterwards, we went to dinner. He had historian Jamon Jordan, who you've heard here on the African History Network show a number of times. And it was myself and Dr. Darrell Scott. So we talked for about 2 hours. And Dr. Darrell Scott said, now he teaches a history class at Howard University on mass incarceration and what's it called? Mass incarceration, slavery and mass incarceration, something like that. And he talks about how majority of his students come into the class thinking that the 13th Amendment created mass incarceration and all this nonsense. This is because Ava DuVernay, I love Ava DuVernay. That documentary was flawed. The whole premise is flawed. Okay. And the 1619 Project operates based upon that flawed premise. All right. There's some good things in the 1619 Project, but this is not one of them. Okay. Now, at the same time, it shouldn't be condemned. You don't need a president attacking it. Okay. You can say, hey, let's revise this. Let's expand this. Let's make it better. You don't need a president attacking it and condemning it. But for the sake of time, and let's see, what do we, oh, hell. All right. Mass incarceration did not arise from the 13th Amendment. No, it did not. If he gave the example, in South Carolina is where the Civil War started, and South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, December 20th, 1860, 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln became president-elect. Okay, he became president-elect early November 1860. It was like November 6th, I think it was 1860. South Carolina did not have their first state prison until 1866, the year after the Civil War ends. Civil War ends June of 1865. He said when they had their first, they built their first state prison. Now they had county prisons for the counties. It wasn't their first prison in South Carolina, but their first state prison. He said, how many beds do you think they had? Now this is after the 13th Amendment was ratified, December 1865. He said they only had 100 beds. So if you're designing all this to have mass incarceration, why you only have 100 beds in a state prison? When you actually studied it, so what happened was I was doing research for a lecture I did in 2016 dealing with the history of the war on drugs. And I dealt with Richard Nixon's war on drugs. We dealt with the prison industry, privatized prisons. I had already done previous lectures dealing with privatized prisons, things like this, Core Civic, Geo Group, Whack and Hut, federal prison industries going back to 1934, Unicor, 1978, privatized prisons bidding on federal contracts and privatized prisons producing all different types of products that are then bought by big corporations, et cetera. I had studied all that. So then I started studying the chronology of how all this plays out from 1865, then going back to the 60s and 1970, when you had relatively low prison rates. And then because in 1970, there's only about 300,000 people in prison, period, total, federal prison, state prison. Then 71, when Nixon declares his war on drugs, June 17th, 1971, in front of U.S. Congress, because he's trying to get an increase in funding to fight the war on drugs. Then you start seeing an increase in the prison populations. Okay. So you go from 65 to 71. Okay. That's 106 years. If it's designed, if the 13th Amendment in 1865 was designed to re-enslave African Americans, and they're trying to plan mass incarceration, why did it take 106 years for that to happen? That don't sound like good planning to me. The sharecropping system did more harm and did more to re-enslave African Americans than the prison system back then. And would you, because the southern states instituted laws that stated that you had to have labor contracts with some of the southern states. You had to have labor contracts with plantations and things like this. So the sharecropping system was a way to re-enslave us back to agriculture. The sharecropping system did more damage than the prison system. Even the convict leasing, there were more people in the sharecropping system than even in the convict leasing system. And this convict leasing system was short-lived. So when you actually go study the chronology of all this and how it happens, is different than the Black folklore that's talked about in barbershops and hair salons. When you actually go study this, it's like, because I was looking at the Ava DuVernay, the 13th, and doing all this research, and I'm working on this presentation, and I'm looking at this timeline. I'm like, why the hell did it take 106 years for mass incarceration to happen if 13th Amendment was passed to promote mass incarceration? Then in talking to Dr. Darrell Scott, who's a history professor at Howard University, because I'm like, I said, this stuff doesn't add up. Doesn't make any sense. And then he was explaining, well, the 13th Amendment is based upon the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. He said they're giving black people, specifically black men, they're giving them the same rights that white people are having, white men are having. So that law already applied to white men, so they're making it apply to African Americans at the same time. Doesn't mean that African Americans were not disproportionately incarcerated. Yeah, they were disproportionately incarcerated, but that didn't start mass incarceration. That has nothing to do with mass incarceration. It doesn't. So that's some more Kanye West bullshit. That's what that is. So 4, mass incarceration did not arise from the 13th Amendment. 5, American history is not reducible to race and racism. Okay. Racism does play a part, but it's like the whole way this stuff evolves. It's like when you go study. Okay. So if you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., right? And where's my copy of chapter 2? Where's my copy of Before the Mayflower? Did it fall down? Well, they lay out, if you go to the back where they deal with landmarks in African American history, and you look at here it is. This is the 6th edition. You look at 1661, I think it is 1641. So the first colony to have codified slave laws is Massachusetts in 1641. Massachusetts became the first colony to give statutory recognition to slavery, 1641. Other colonies followed. Connecticut, 1650. Virginia, 1661. Maryland, 1663. New York and New Jersey, 1664. South Carolina, 1682. Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, 1700. North Carolina, 1715. Georgia, 1750. When you go study this, you had cases of men of African descent, or black men, coming from England, entering into voluntary servitude, serving their term of 5 to 7 years, going on to own land, and then own indentured servants and or slaves, however you want to classify it. They own white indentured servants and own black slaves. You had this taking place in this period of time from the in the 1640s up into probably about 1680, somewhere around there. You had this period of time of 40 to 50 years where you see things like this taking place. Okay. And so racism is going to evolve in this country. institution of slavery evolves in this country. It wasn't, so, see, the myth that we operate based upon is August 20th, 1619, when these 29 Africans are on this white line slave ship. It was really an English pirate ship, because what happened was there was a ship called the San Juan Bautista, which picked up 350 Africans from Angola, the Angola area. And that ship was hijacked by English pirates around the Gulf of Mexico. There were two English pirate ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. They're going to take about 50 Africans off of the San Juan Bautista and put them on those two English pirate ships. Those English pirate ships coming to Virginia, and it's on the White Lion, what we call a slave ship, but it was really an English pirate ship. They're going to exchange 29 Africans or Negroes, 29 Africans for food and water and supplies in Virginia. Okay. This whole codified slave laws and that whole system in the 13 colonies, it doesn't exist. It is going to evolve. Now it exists in the Spanish colonies, because the Spanish were already involved in the transatlantic slave trade, and they were involved. They get involved right after the Portuguese. The Portuguese get involved in 1441. The Portuguese dominate for the first 200 years. We're talking about close to 200 years after that, in 1619, close to 200 years after that. We're talking about like 180 years after that. Okay. So different European nations get involved to various degrees at different times also. But we're under the impression that 1619, like this whole system in the British colonies just totally exists, and it doesn't. It's going to evolve, and it evolves in different colonies, and it's going to hit different colonies at different times as well. Okay. So when you actually study the chronology of all this, it's different than how we actually think it happened. There was an article there's a few good articles dealing with this one. And I did a whole presentation dealing with from 1526 and 1619, but there's one from USA Today dealing with 1619. Let me see if we can pull this up. Yeah, there's a really good one from 1619. There's a really good one from USA Today. 1619 in America, 400 years ago, Africans arrived in Virginia. Okay, 1619, Africans arrived in Virginia. History.com also has a good article dealing with the first Africans arriving in Virginia, 1619. And that's not when the first Africans arrived. We can talk about the first Africans in bondage in the British colonies. We can talk about 1619 then, but that's not when the first Africans came to this land. Okay. So when you actually study like the chronology of this history is different. Now, those 29 Africans on the White Line pirate ship or slave ship, they were captured. Okay, because they were captured by the Portuguese in Angola. So they were captured, they were in bondage. But in the British colonies, these 13 colonies, codified slave laws didn't exist then. They're going to be put into a form of indentured servitude. Okay. So we have to understand how all this history evolved. All right, let's post the link to this article here from USA Today. History.com has a good article also dealing with when the first Africans arrived in the British colonies, arrived in this land. All right, let's continue for the sake of time, because all right. So back to this article here from AtlantaBlackStar.com. AtlantaBlackStar.com. Our youth will be taught to love America, Trump vows, this is a direct quote from this jackass, quote, our youth will be taught to love America, end quote. Trump vows to restore patriotic education in schools to counter the narrative that nation or that the nation is wicked and racist. Maybe you should resign, because a lot of that's coming from you. Well, we know systemic racism exists, but you're fanning the flames. Maybe you should resign. If you don't want us to think that America is wicked and racist, maybe you should stop doing wicked and racist things. The New York Times unveiled the 1619 Project in August 2019 in commemoration of the date on which the first Africans were brought into the shores of Virginia as slaves. The ongoing project seeks to, quote, reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative, end quote. Nicole Hannah Jones, who authored the opening essay of the project, won a Pulitzer Prize for commentary earlier in 2020. Donald Trump claimed the project teaches children that, quote, we were founded on oppression, not freedom. We were founded on oppression, not freedom. Trump added that, quote, patriotic moms and dads, end quote, will demand their children not be fed hateful lies. Last month, in the month of August, he threatened to deny federal funding to schools that teach the 1619 Project because they created a curriculum surrounding. Now, I have not reviewed the curriculum. I've read the 1619 Project articles at New York Times, but I have not reviewed the curriculum. So I don't know one way or another. I don't on the curriculum. Hopefully some of the flaws in the 1619 Project are correct in the curriculum, but I don't know. So the project is taught in many schools. The 1619 Project curriculum is taught in many schools across the country and has been adapted to be taught at all grade levels. During the speech, Donald Trump vowed to restore patriotic education to schools through the 1776 Commission, which will be established through the signing of an executive order. I wonder if the 1776 Commission is going to advocate for reparations for African Americans. What do you think? You think the 1776 Commission that Donald Trump is commissioning through executive order, and he's against reparations, he don't even want to talk about slavery, you think it's going to advocate for reparations for African Americans? Donald Trump also announced that a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities will support the development of the, quote, pro-American curriculum, end quote, pro-American curriculum, end quote. I wonder if this pro-American curriculum is going to teach that enslaved Africans were happy slaves, or is it going to teach that we were is it going to teach we were immigrants searching for a better way of life, or, you know, quote, our youth will be taught to love America with all of their heart and all of their souls, end quote, he said. His plans to establish a new patriotic curriculum were met with swift criticism. Susan Rice, former ambassador to the United Nations, responded to Donald Trump's speech saying, quote, this was one of the most astonishing speeches I've heard him give. He talks about promoting patriotic education. I thought I was listening to Mao Zedong running communist China. This sounded something straight out of a dictatorship, what Trump was saying. Trump has authoritarian tendency. I'm telling you right now, if this person gets a second term, it's going to be worse than the first term. We won't even recognize this country. And it ain't going to be for the better either. The only thing keeping him from being totally unhinged is he has to win a second term. He's trying to appeal to suburban women. He's trying to appeal to college educated white people. Okay. The only thing keeping him from being totally unhinged and showing his entire ass is he has to win a second term. We don't have a patriotic system of education where the dear leader tells the people what they must learn. Susan Rice, former ambassador to the United Nations and former national security advisor for President Barack Obama, said. Now, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, a Boston University professor and author of the New York Times bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, called Trump's patriotic educational proposal, quote unquote, racist. Lawyer and activist Dr. Shola Mosk Shogba Mimo said the curriculum was, quote unquote, code for white supremacy, which it is. The federal government does not have jurisdiction over school curricula, as that power is left up to the states. The federal government does not have jurisdiction over school curricula, as that power is left up to the states. Federal government can make suggestions, but see, because of the 10th Amendment, you have states' rights. 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Okay, let's go to, let me see, hopefully this will play here. Let's go to this clip here from MSNBC. They interviewed Nicole Hannah Jones on Trump attacking the 1619 Project. Let me get this clip going. Let's see here. Just a second here. How's everybody doing? And we're going to zip through these other topics here. Some of this we have to save for the next Sunday show. So Nicole Hannah Jones, who is the editor of the 1619 Project, she was interviewed by Ayman Mohadeen on MSNBC. September 18th, 2020, Nicole Hannah Jones on Trump's 1776 Commission, A Patriotic History Doesn't Have to Be Obscure. Let's try to play this clip here. New York Times reporter Nicole Hannah Jones, creator of the educational 1619 Project, responds to Trump's 1776 Commission, calling it, quote, part of an ongoing effort to downplay and minimize the role of slavery and the brutality and crime against humanity that slavery was, end quote. Okay, we'll wait for that to load up. And then next, I want to deal with this story about the Congressional Black Caucus introducing a Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically and socially. Now, a lot of people probably didn't hear about this, okay? Let's see here. Let's turn up the volume. This is why African-American news media is so important. All right, let's try to get the volume up. The volume's not playing. All right, just a second here.
Are no longer
using his office to open a new front in the culture war in this country. Playing.
Hold on just a second. This is
slavery. In American history, and announcing that he will sign an order to establish the, quote, 1776 Commission, which would promote, quote, patriotic education.
By viewing every issue through the lens of race, they want to impose a new segregation, and we must not allow that to happen. Critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and the crusade against American history is toxic propaganda. Patriotic moms and dads are going to demand that their children are no longer fed hateful lies about this country.
Joining me now is the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter
like he was
covering
on drugs
racial
or
injustice for the New York Times Magazine, Nicole Hannah Jones. She is the creator of the Times landmark 1619 project. Nicole, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, let me give you a chance, to respond to the president, what you heard there.
Well, of course, what the president is saying is ridiculous and not based in facts. What he's arguing for is to indoctrinate our children in a government-approved patriotic history that actually obscures the role of slavery. The 1776 Commission, if it were to be based on facts, would have to acknowledge that we were a new country founded on the ideals of universal rights and freedoms, but ultimately run largely by enslavers. The drafter of the Declaration of Independence was an enslaver. The father of the Constitution was an enslaver. The first president of this country was an enslaver. 10 of the first 12 presidents of this country were enslavers, as were a majority of the Supreme Court justices. At the revolution at 1776, 1/5 of the population of this new country lived in chattel slavery. These are the facts of our history. So a patriotic history doesn't have to lie or obscure those truths. We have to deal with those truths.
It seems, and I apologize if I'm stepping out of line here, a bit rich for the president to criticize educating people about slavery on the day after the attorney general compared slavery with asking people to socially distance and wear a mask. Am I wrong in saying that it's a bit rich that the president is trying to lecture this country about slavery a day after that?
I mean, rich is one way to describe it. Intentionally obtuse. Part of an ongoing effort to downplay and minimize the role of slavery and the brutality and crime against humanity that slavery was, and of course the ongoing legacy of that. So yes, of course, William Barr arguing that shutdown orders to save lives are akin to chattel slavery actually just confirms the thesis of the 1619 Project and why it must exist.
Let me talk about the 1619 Project for a moment, because it's been a year since it was launched. What have you been hearing from students and young people who have been exposed to the lessons within it?
Thank you for that. And let's be clear, the 1619 Project, as used in schools, is a supplemental curriculum. It is not replacing the history curriculum that students are currently getting. What it is offering an alternative story. It is focusing the lens around slavery, where most of our history really tries to obscure that and erase the legacy of slavery. And what I hear from high school students is they are learning to understand their country in ways that they had not. They are learning to question the narratives that they've received and to become actually more critical thinkers, which is what education is supposed to do.
It seems to me, again, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a little bit of projectionism from the president. His latest speech downplaying slavery, saying that it's only the other side that wants to look at this country through the prism of racism. But it seems like it's an explicit appeal to white voters in this country. Is this an acknowledgement that the Republican Party, you think, is staking its future success on holding on to a plurality of white voters?
I mean, absolutely. I'm not even sure what the other side means when you're talking about the history of America. The 1619 Project is called 1619 because Black people have been on these lands for 400 years. Black Americans have fought in every war that this country has ever waged. Black Americans have helped democratize this country. We just buried one of the greatest Americans this country ever produced, John Lewis, and we did not have a democracy until that voting rights struggle. So when he says the other side or evokes the image of patriotic parents, he is defining patriotism and therefore citizenship by whiteness. And I hope that we as Americans, no matter what you think about the 1619 Project, will categorically reject that and also reject government efforts to censor learning in schools and a work of American journalism.
All right, Nicole Hannah Jones, thank you very much. We're always smarter with your perspectives. Appreciate you.
All right, so that was from MSNBC. That was September 18th, 2020. That was Ayman Mohadeen interviewing Nicole Hannah Jones. Name of that clip, Nicole Hannah Jones on Trump's 1776 Commission. A patriotic history doesn't have to obscure truths. So you have a lot of people that really don't want to deal with the history of slavery, don't want to have to deal with the history of white supremacy and racism. And really the reason, a lot of this has to do with the fact that a lot of not all white people, but you have a lot of them who don't want to deal with white privilege and unearned benefits. Because if you deal with slavery, you deal with the maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources, you deal with the theft of land, you deal with the Head Rights Acts of giving out 50 acres of land and things like this, and you get an additional land for every slave that you own. You deal with a redistribution of land like the Homestead Act of 1862, which redistributed about 250 million acres of land. And this starts during the U.S. Civil War. And the last allotment of land was given out in 1988. It was about 80 acres of land in Alaska through the Homestead Act of 1862. And the overwhelming majority of people who got land were white people, white men. You deal with the Southern Homestead Act of 1866, which redistributed about 45 million acres of land. And that was in 5 Southern states. Overwhelming majority of people who got that land were white men. You deal with the Dawes Allotment Act of 1887, which redistributes about 138 million acres of land. And it was supposed to redistribute land to Native Americans and Black Indians, things like this. White people got 2/3 of that land. Okay, so when you start dealing, if you start going through the history, you're gonna run into all these laws and this maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources. Then you have to deal with white privilege. When you go through, deal with that, and you deal with the GI Bill in 1944, you deal with the New Deal, even though there were some things in the New Deal that helped African Americans. You deal with the Social Security Act, the Minimum Wage Act, and we were locked in a lot of jobs that didn't apply to. And you deal with the minimum, you deal with the GI Bill of 1944, okay, and how a lot of the African-American veterans of World War II, we couldn't take full advantage of the GI Bill, or we were, and the GI Bill didn't just deal with education, it also gave low interest loans to start businesses and to buy homes, which allowed a lot of white families to buy homes and accumulate wealth. A lot of us were locked out of that, even though you had African-American World War II veterans. They couldn't fully participate and take advantage of what they earned and their taxpayer dollars paid for. So when you start dealing with all that and start going through history, dealing with laws, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, policies, and politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. When you start dealing with this maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources throughout history, it leads you up to white privilege, unearned benefits. So a lot of people don't want to have that conversation about white privilege. So they don't want to have a conversation at the base level dealing with the history of slavery and racism and white supremacy. They don't even want to engage in that because they know where that conversation is going to lead to. All right, so check all this out, dealing with the 1619 Project. Let's get to this next story here. News1.com had a good article. The Congressional Black Caucus introduces Job and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically and socially. Now, I didn't see anything about this in mainstream media, okay? But this is why we have to have African-American news sources, all right? So if you like this type of information, also you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me / the AHN Show, paypal.me / the AHN Show, okay? And or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And that helps support the African History Network, helps us finance our Sunday night show, keep doing the research, etc. All right. The multifaceted bill is divided into 2 parts. So the CBC, Congressional Black Caucus, was heralding a new bill that it says will make vast improvements in the lives of African-American families, in particular with in particular with significant legislative efforts to bridge the gaps specifically affecting them in the employment and criminal justice arenas, specifically affecting African Americans in the employment and criminal justice arenas. It's divided into two parts. The Multifaceted Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 makes provisions that, if passed, would, quote, increase the upward social mobility of Black families and help ensure equal protection under the law, end quote, the CBC's ambitious new sweeping legislation says. You can go to cbc.house.gov, cbc.house.gov, and read more about this, and also read the article from newsone.com. CBC introduces Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically and socially. cbc.house.gov is the official website of the Congressional Black Caucus. So part one of the bill, the first part of the bill is devoted to jobs. It is broken up into 5 subcategories to address the nation's most pressing needs on the employment front during a time when there is unprecedented joblessness. We know you had about 860,000 people that filed for unemployment first time last week. And it's about 29.7 million people who've applied for unemployment in the past 26 weeks. Okay, so you got about 30 million people unemployed. That includes it's about 17 million people who were getting the pandemic unemployment assistance. They were people who were self-employed, and the gig workers, the people Uber, Lyft, things like this, right? So the first part of the bill is devoted to jobs, is broken into 5 subcategories to address the nation's most pressing needs on the employment front during a time when there is unprecedented joblessness, especially among African Americans. The jobs portion of the bill addresses various aspects of employment, such as workforce development, community and economic development, poverty, housing, and wealth creation, as well as education. Now, a lot of people say, oh, we need to focus on owning business. We need to focus on owning business. We need to focus on owning business. That's good, but you do realize 41% of Black-owned businesses have been wiped out as of April of this year because of COVID-19. So that's good to say, you know, well, we need to start business. We need to start businesses, but about 50% or 51% of new businesses don't make a profit till the 3rd year in business. So a lot of people are going to need a job so they can live from month to month while their Black-owned businesses makes a profit if it stays in business. There's a difference between like the entrepreneurial myth and like the reality. There's a difference. I've taught entrepreneurship for 7 years. I taught at a community college, taught for the United Way. My degree's in business administration also. There's a difference between like the myth of entrepreneurship and like the reality. Because I tell my students, don't quit your day job, because you're going to need a steady paycheck. Don't quit your day job while you build your Black-owned business. Don't quit your day job. You're going to need that. Because a lot of times people start a business and their business cannot afford them. Their business cannot afford it. They can't take any money out of the business. The business can't afford to pay them a salary. The business cannot afford them. The business has to build revenue up, has to build profits up, has to build customers to be able to afford to pay you a salary. And 95% of African American businesses don't have any employees. It's just the owner. Okay, so this is like a whole myth, you know. A lot of stuff, it sounds good when people are trying to sell you classes and seminars. You know, I know the game. Game recognizes game. A lot of stuff sounds good when people trying to sell you classes and seminars, but like it's a whole nother different world when you actually jump into it. Okay. And I tell people, you know, entrepreneurs, you should go to a community college, take at least one entrepreneurship class, because it can give you a lot of insight into entrepreneurship. It can save you thousands of dollars in mistakes. It could possibly keep you from going bankrupt. A lot of these people that lost their businesses through this COVID-19 environment, And Forbes.com, read this article from Forbes.com. We've talked about it here on the show. This deals with the COVID-19 economy and how it has devastated small businesses. This is one of the reasons why Amazon.com is doing so well. Because a lot of small businesses that were selling products that Amazon sells, they've gone out of business. So people go online to Amazon and buy. Read this article from Forbes. So, because all this stuff is connected. Let's see here. Yeah, the COVID-19 crisis has wiped out nearly half of Black small businesses. The COVID-19 crisis has wiped out nearly half of small Black businesses. Now, that's as of August 2020. That's as of April 2020. It was 41% have been wiped out. Probably 50% now. So the first, the jobs portion of the bill addresses various aspects of employment, such as workforce development, community and economic development, poverty, housing, and wealth creation, as well as education. From including incentives to provide more Black girls with opportunities to pursue careers in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, fields to in those fields. It also deals with addressing Black-owned businesses, personal finance, and historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. All that's in this bill. The bill's jobs division casts a wide net and covers the gamut when it comes to all aspects of Black employment. The second part of the bill is also multi-tiered and concentrates on the ongoing efforts to reform the nation's criminal justice system. I thought Donald Trump reformed. Didn't he champion criminal justice reform? Isn't it reform now? I thought didn't Trump already do that? The Great White Hope? That wasn't criminal. I said, come on. He doesn't even want to. Trump doesn't want to deal with holding police officers accountable. His attorney general said systemic racism in policing doesn't exist. William Barr said systemic racism in policing doesn't exist. You want to deal with criminal justice reform, but you don't want to investigate the patterns and practices of police departments and hold police accountable. You want to deal with criminal justice reform. Trump really doesn't want to. He does it. The person who was championing criminal justice reform is like Trump tries to take credit for the First Step Act. When the First Step Act originated in the House of Representatives, Trump didn't champion that. He wasn't running on criminal justice reform in 2016. He was on law and order. If you wanted criminal justice reform, you would not have reversed the initiative from the Obama administration to abolish privatized prisons at the federal level. Trump reversed that initiative. August of 2016, the Obama administration announced that they were not going to renew federal contracts for privatized prisons because they can't control at the state level because of the 10th Amendment and states' rights. States can abolish privatized prisons like the state of California. Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill in, I think it was either October or November of 2019, to abolish privatized prisons in the state of California. Okay, you have states' rights, federal rights. This is why you have to study the Constitution. When the Obama administration made that announcement in August of 2016, the stock prices of Core Civic, which used to be called Corrections Corporation of America, they are the largest owner-operator of privatized prisons in the country. The stock prices of Core Civic and Geo Group took a hit because they're publicly traded companies. Those two companies donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. In March of 2016, it's about March of 2016, Trump was interviewed on MSNBC by Chris Matthews, who's no longer on MSNBC. He was interviewed by Chris Matthews on Hardball, And Trump said privatized prisons seem to work very well and seem to save money. No, they don't. No, they don't. So Trump gets in office. He reverses the initiative from the Obama administration and continues with privatized prisons at the federal level. Not only do they continue with privatized prisons at the federal level, these privatized prisons start making more money because they increase the number of contracts that they have to house migrants coming to this country. Because housing migrants in these privatized facilities is $1 billion industry. So when you go research this, what happened was the U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years in December 2015 under President Obama. Nobody wants to talk about this. I don't know why. All these people talk about the 94 crime bill. Why don't you talk about this? The U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years. Privatized prisons were losing money under President Obama. That's why they backed Trump, because Trump supported privatized prisons. So if you can't, on the one hand, talk about criminal justice reform, then on the other hand, support privatized prisons. That doesn't make sense. So when I do my presentation on 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African Americans, these are things that I talk about. All right. New York Times had a big article dealing with dealing with the contracts that the privatized prison companies were getting. And also news1.com had a really good article dealing with how the prison population had dropped under President Obama. The percentage of African Americans in prison dropped from 40% to 34%. Pew Research has the research on this under the 8 years of the Obama administration. Okay, nobody wants to talk about this. Let me see something here. So I want to see if I can pull this up here from News One. I saw the article. I just saw it recently. We'll have to post a link. I'll post a link to the article. I have to find it again. All right, but anyway, let's continue here. All right, so let's go back to this article from news1.com. CBC introduces Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically and socially. And let me see something here. Read this article here from the New York Times. The $1 billion business of operating shelters for migrant children. The $1 billion business for operating shelters for migrant children. We'll pull that up because I have all these articles. They're bookmarked. I just have to find them. Okay, so the second part of the bill is also multi-tiered and concentrates on the ongoing efforts to reform the nation's criminal justice system. All right. The Justice Division of the bill, let me see, from improving the way police interact with the communities they serve to expanding access to social services for individuals who have paid their debt to society. The legislation's language says, in part, the Justice division of the bill addresses criminal justice and includes the CBC's own Justice in Police Act of 2020 that could not get passed in the U.S. Senate. The Justice in Policing Act of 2020 got blocked in the Senate. Moscow Mitch McConnell. So the CBC included that bill in this House version of the bill. The Justice Division of the bill addresses criminal justice and includes the CBC's own Justice and Policing Act of 2020 that ambitiously aims to end police brutality, hold police accountable, improve transparency in policing, and create meaningful structural change when it comes to how law enforcement does their jobs. Health equity, the coronavirus pandemic, environmental justice, and voting rights. All right, so read the rest of this article here. CBC introduces Jobs and Justice Act of 2020 to help Black families economically and socially. So we need to call on members of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives to get this bill passed. Okay, get this bill passed. Let me give you the number to the congressional switchboard. I have it here on my phone. The congressional switchboard gets you any member of the U.S. House of Representatives or U.S. Senate. So you can call your member of the House of Representatives in the U.S. Senate, talk to them, talk to their staff, etc. When you want them to vote a certain way on the bill, you call them or email them. You can email them. You can show up at their office, protest outside, protest peacefully. Now, don't go to act damn fool. They say, Michael Imhotep told me come up here. No. But 202-224-3121 is the congressional switchboard. I've called before, called my U.S. Senator. 202-224-3121 is the congressional switchboard. If you get the automated service, you call, they ask for your zip code, and they'll let you know who your member of the U.S. House of Representatives is, and they'll let you know who your senator is, okay? One time I called, and I got a live person scared the hell out of me. I'm like, is this congressional switchboard? They say, yeah. Then I say, usually when I call, I get automated service, but I got a real person. I was just like, what the hell? But they say, yeah, this is a congressional switchboard. They'll say, okay, I want to give me Debbie Stabenow, Senator Debbie Stabenow's office. All right. So 202-224-3121. We also need to call your U.S. Senator, tell them to vote no on approving Trump's nomination for U.S. Supreme Court. That should wait until after the inauguration. Should wait till after the inauguration. All right. So we have to put pressure on them for that. New York Times, the $1 billion business of operating shelters for migrant children, June 21st, 2018. The business of housing, transporting, and watching over migrant children detained along the southwest border is not a $1 million business. It's a $1 billion business. The nonprofit Southwest Key programs won at least $955 million in contracts since 2015 to run shelters and provide other services to immigrant children in federal custody. Its shelter for migrant boys at a former Walmart Supercenter in South Texas has been the focus of nationwide scrutiny, but Southwest Key is but one player in the lucrative, secretive world of the migrant shelter business. About a dozen contractors operate more than 30 facilities in Texas alone, with numerous others contracted for about 100 shelters in 16 other states. Okay, read this full article. This is from New York Times. All right, let's get to Joe Biden's plan, part 5 of Joe Biden's plan to empower Black America. Is Lift Every Voice, Black Agenda, 22-page Black Agenda. I've gone through, read the entire thing 3 times. You know, this is our 5th week breaking this down. Go to joebiden.com. You can read it in its entirety and also read his entire policy platform. But May 5th, 2020, the article came out from Black Press USA. Black Press USA, that's the national newspaper Association. That's their newswire. There is a Black newswire. You have newswires like the Associated Press, Reuters, things like this, right? National Newspaper Association, they have a newswire. And I follow the National Newspaper Association on Facebook. Their website is blackpressusa.com, blackpressusa.com. National Newspaper Association, that is an association of about 260 Black-owned newspapers, okay, all across the country. So May 5th, 2020, they have the article here, Joe Biden's plan for empowering Black America. And it has the link to his 22-page agenda there to empower Black America. But briefly here, it says Biden said the plan reflects, let me see, Biden makes many months of work back from officials, activists, organizations, practitioners, policy experts, strategists, and young people. It's a collective effort, okay? Biden said the plan reflects many months of work and feedback from local elected officials, activists, organizations, practitioners, policy experts, strategists, and young people. His campaign called the plan, quote unquote, a living document, It said, to hearing from everyone as they continue to develop the Democrats' vision for all of America. So this was May 5th of 2020, okay? In a news release, the campaign noted that Biden, quote, knows we need a comprehensive agenda for African Americans with an ambition that matches the scale of the challenge and with a recognition that race-neutral policies are not a sufficient response to race-based disparities, end quote. Race-neutral policies are not a sufficient response to race-based disparities. Now, this is our 5th week in breaking this down. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read it, especially if you're going to talk about what they ain't talking about and all this stuff. I hear people talk about, he ain't talking about this. Nigga, where the hell you been? That's not true. Part 1 deals with advance the economic mobility of African Americans and close the racial wealth and income gaps. Now, half of it deals with economic empowerment for African Americans, pages 2 through 11. Okay, we dealt with that in week 1. Part 2, expand access to high quality education and tackle racial inequity in our education system. 3, make far-reaching investments in ending health disparities by race. 4, strengthen America's commitment to justice. 5, make the right to vote and the right to equal protection real for African Americans. 6, address environmental justice. So it's broken into 6 parts. This is week 5. This week we'll deal with environmental justice. And when you first read it, they go through and they have a lot dealing with COVID-19 and the devastating impact COVID-19 has had on African Americans. So a lot of the agenda also deals with addressing COVID-19 and the impact, the negative impact it's had on African Americans. So let's look at address environmental justice. So when we deal with topics like this, we also have to understand what I call political self-defense. And 6 principles of political self-defense that I lay out, because a lot of people say, well, we should only vote for people to have a Black agenda. Okay. Now, you don't talk about stopping the people who have an anti-Black agenda. You just focus on the people who have a Black agenda. Now, as somebody who's actually been involved in writing public policy for the city of Detroit, policies can positively or negatively impact you, whether they say Black or African American. Policies don't have to say Black or African American to benefit you or to hurt you. We have to understand this. So it's not just whose policies are most beneficial for African Americans. That is something that's important to look at. But also, we have to look at whose policies will do the least amount of harm. Because an anti-Black agenda is worse than not having a Black agenda. It's one thing to be indifferent. It's another thing to specifically target you to harm you. So we also have to look at people who have an anti-Black agenda focused on stopping them. So we have to look at whose policies are most beneficial for African Americans, whose policies will do the least amount of harm, whose policies are whose policies have the most realistic chance of actually becoming law. Okay. And then whose policies best match our issues and our concerns, which candidate, and this is not just for president, this is in general, which candidate can create an environment for us to push our agenda the farthest and get the most accomplished. This especially is critical for president. Who can create an environment for us to push our agenda the farthest and get the most accomplished? A lot of these bills, a lot of these initiatives have to pass through both chambers of the legislative branch of government before they are signed into law by a president. About 70% to 80% of what a president wants to do in general, their policy platform, has to go through Congress. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution gives powers of the purse strings to Congress. Who can be pushed the farthest in the right direction to get the most accomplished? Which candidate can be pushed the farthest in the right direction to get the most accomplished? We also have to understand how to leverage our economics to force our politics and force our agenda. And which candidate will protect the gains that are already in place that have been made? Because one of the reasons why I put together this presentation, this whole concept, is that many times we'll vote from election to election, but we don't properly assess what was accomplished in the previous 2 or 4 years and understand what policies and what gains we made that have to be protected. So we'll vote from election to election, but don't understand the connection between the previous 2 years, previous 4 years, previous 8 years, and this election here. What's on the ballot? What has to be protected? Which candidate will protect the gains that have been made? Because we keep having to go through all this stuff over and over and over again because we don't understand history. So we have to understand the concept of not just, okay, whose policies are going to be most beneficial for African Americans? Who's going to protect the gains that are already in place? Who's going to protect the laws that are already in place that are beneficial to us? But how do you protect gains that were made if you're under the misconception that no gains were made? This is why people should read the document at whitehouse.gov, Progress of the African American Community under the Obama administration. Because if we had read that in 2016, it was up in like 2014. I found out about it from Andre Michael Eglisheim that used to guest host Reverend Al Sharpton's radio show, Politics Nation. And I would hear him talk about it when he guest hosts. He passed away a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. But I heard him talk about it, and I went to the whitehouse.gov and read it. It's still there. Trump hasn't taken it down. Progress of the African American Community under the Obama administration. It breaks down how President Obama's policies in various categories positively impacted the African American community. A lot of these are under attack or have been reversed by Trump now. How do you protect gains that were made if you're under the misconception that no gains were made? So we have to understand all this. And we also have to understand that the reason why many of our people don't fight back is because many of our people don't think they are worth fighting for. Because that foundation of African history and culture, which gives us our values, our interests, and our principles, okay, is not there. Okay, so let's jump into this quickly. Address environmental justice. This is page 22 of the agenda. So Biden knows we cannot turn a blind eye to the way in which environmental burdens and benefits have been and will continue to be distributed unevenly, along racial and social economic lines, not just with respect to climate change, but also pollution of our air, water, and land. The evidence of these disproportionate harms is clear. According to the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, and the National Pharmaceutical Council, African Americans are almost 3 times more likely to die from asthma-related causes than their white counterparts. African Americans are almost 3 times more likely to die from asthma-related causes than their white counterparts. People of color are more likely to live in areas most vulnerable to flooding and other climate change related weather events. They are also less likely to have the funds to prepare for and recover from extreme weather. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, African Americans and Hispanic residents were twice as likely as non-Hispanic white individuals to report experiencing an income shock and lack of recovery support. Let me repeat that. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, African Americans and Hispanic residents were twice as likely as non-Hispanic white individuals to report experiencing an income shock and lack of recovery support. So as President Joe Biden will stand up to the abuse of power by polluters who disproportionately harm communities of color and low-income communities, he has asked his campaign to commence a process to more deeply engage the environmental justice leaders and develop additional policies related to environmental justice. The policies to be announced in the weeks ahead will build on these proposals he has put forward to date. So it breaks it down. Reinstate federal protections rolled back by the Trump administration that were designed to protect communities. The New York Times has a big article dealing with how the Trump administration has rolled back at least 100 environmental protections, all different areas, water, air, what have you. 100 environmental protections. These were laws that were either in place under the Obama administration, put in place by the Obama administration, or kept in place by the Obama administration. 100 regulations. They go through, New York Times has this article, they go through and break it down by category. Okay. So Biden will make it a priority for all agencies to engage in community-driven approaches to develop solutions for environmental injustices affecting communities of color, low income, and indigenous communities. 2, hold polluters accountable. Hold polluters accountable. African-American children living in poverty are more likely than wealthier white children to live in a community that borders chemical facilities, Extreme weather can increase the health risks of being co-located with these toxic structures. Under the Trump administration, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has referred the fewest number of criminal anti-pollution cases to the Justice Department in 30 years. So when you go through, read this agenda, you see a direct correlation between law and policies and conditions. Law and policies and conditions. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, and their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Politics impacts every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink, to the air we breathe, to the food we eat. All that is regulated by politics. Okay. So, allowing corporations to continue to pollute, affecting the health and safety of both workers and surrounding communities without consequences, perpetuates an egregious abuse of power. Failure to reduce emissions disproportionately hurts African Americans and Hispanic residents who experience 37% higher exposure to nitrogen dioxide, which is a toxic pollutant, compared to non-Hispanic whites. Okay, African Americans and Hispanic residents who experience 37% higher exposure to nitrogen dioxide compared to non-Hispanic whites. As President Joe Biden will direct EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Justice Department to pursue these cases to the fullest extent permitted by law, and when needed, seek additional legislation as needed to hold corporate executives personally accountable, including jail time when merited. Okay. Now, next major heading, ensure access to safe drinking water for all communities. Ensure access to safe drinking water for all communities. Biden will make water infrastructure a top priority, for example, by establishing systems to monitor lead and other contaminants in our water supply and take necessary action to eliminate health risks, including holding polluters accountable and support communities in upgrading their systems. Okay, so we know in Flint, Michigan, water was lead contamination in some of the water pipes. It wasn't all the water pipes in Flint, Michigan, but it was a good number of them. We know that's had devastating impact on the children. Children suffer from lead poisoning. They'll deal with brain developmental problems. They'll deal with lifelong problems, health issues, etc. Okay, so all that deals with the environment. All right, a lot of times people don't connect that to policies. A lot of times people don't connect that to federal policies or who's in office. Okay, but all of that is important. Elections have consequences. All right, so read the rest of that. Then we have ensure access to drinking water for all communities. Let's see. In addition, Biden will double federal investments in clean drinking water and water infrastructure and focus new funding on low-income rural, suburban, and urban areas that are struggling to replace pipes and treatment facilities, and especially on communities at high risk of lead or other kinds of contamination. So that directly applies to Flint, Michigan. But there were 3,000 communities across the country whose water lead level is higher than Flint, Michigan. There was a study that came out sometime around when the Flint, Michigan story broke, or maybe the next year, that talks about this. Newark, New Jersey has a problem with contaminated lead in the water. Next bullet point, monitor for lead and other contaminants and hold polluters accountable. Monitor for lead and other contaminants and hold polluters accountable. You can read the rest of that. Next, prioritize communities harmed by climate change and pollution. African Americans are disproportionately impacted by climate change. Prioritize communities harmed by climate change and pollution. Low-income communities and communities of color don't equally share in the benefits of well-paying job opportunities that result from our clean energy economy. As President Joe Biden will make sure these communities receive preference in competitive grant programs in the clean economy revolution. In addition, Biden will pursue new partnerships with community colleges, unions, and the private sector to develop programs to train all of America's workforce to tap into the growing clean energy economy. This past week, Biden did a press conference and he gave a speech and he talked about his economic plan. And he talked specifically about creating 4 million new jobs. Okay, a lot of that was tied to the energy sector, clean energy, different things like this. Okay, you can go read all that at joebiden.com. This is not an endorsement, but go read all of that. You can read Trump's policies also and read Trump's anti-Black agenda also that he has. Well, you can look at the news and see the anti-Black agenda. So in the private sector to develop programs to train all of America's workforce to tap into the growing clean energy economy, incorporate skills training into infrastructure investment planning by engaging state and local communities, and reinvigorate and repurpose AmeriCorps for sustainability so that every American can participate in the clean energy economy. We also know that resiliency investments can raise property values, and push lower income families out of the neighborhoods. Okay. That's like gentrification. Climate change mitigation efforts must consciously protect low income communities from green gentrification. Climate change mitigation efforts must consciously protect low income communities from green gentrification. All right. So check that out. That you read the article from blackpressusa.com, Joe Biden's plan for empowering Black America. That's from May 5th, 2020. And it has the link to Biden's Black agenda, 22 pages. Read it in its entirety, then read his entire policy platform, then compare that to Trump's. Now we can look and see what Trump's done for the past 3.5 years, but you compare the two. Okay. All right. And then let's see, next week we'll deal with this article here. We don't have time to get to it. How the pandemic is widening the racial wealth gap. Racial wealth gap. This deals with how coronavirus is widening the racial wealth gap. This is from September 19th, 2020, NPR.org, National Public Radio. And we'll talk about this next week. That's enough radio for today. All right. Remember that you could donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have digital downloads also. My online courses there dealing with ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. All right, hey, look, we have to get out of here. Remember the African History Network. We focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you is based upon what you think about yourself, what you think about yourself. Thought about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. Remember, right corrects wrong behavior is not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next week also. And also check out my presentation that I did dealing with the film Black Panther. I break down Wakanda. There's a real word, etc. Okay. Follow us on our social media platforms, The African History Network, The African History Network on Facebook, and on YouTube, Michael Imhotep on YouTube. All right, remember, right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you next week. Peace.